Here we go! Hello, everybody. Assuming this is working, welcome back to Guards by Terry Pratchett. As I explained last time, this is one of the Discworld books. It's really good. Okay, good. It's still working. Sorry. Still a little bit on edge about streaming by myself, as I am wont to do. Anyway. So, welcome all this fine evening, or not, depending on time zone and continent. This is the second of these streams. The first one, the VOD, is still up. We have a new readings playlist. There's only 3 videos in it right now, but as we continue doing stuff like this, it'll probably fill out, make a nice little background noise, audiobook kind of thingy. Before I continue, I will say it's possible that I won't be able to stream more Guards specifically after this, because, as I found out through some hefty Googling yesterday, reading books aloud online is a complex legal gray area, like every other fun thing I want to do. Basically, reading, like, part of a book is mostly okay. Like, the first video, where it's only a quarter of the book, that's mostly fine. But if I read the whole thing, that basically turns into an unlicensed free audiobook. Obviously not audiobook quality, but, you know. Let's just... Oh, yeah, okay. Chat's just carroting it up. That's good. I've reached out to the Pratchett estate, basically just to ask if I can continue, and if they say yes, I will continue, and if they say no, I will not be able to continue. But most of you have already read the book, and those of you who haven't should definitely read the book. So, yeah, just that little bit of housekeeping. I will do my best, and even if we can't continue reading these, there's also, like, all kinds of, you know, Doyle, public domain stuff that we'll probably continue reading, just because these are really fun to do. Anyway, yeah, fingers crossed that we can continue reading this book, because I love this book, and it seems like a lot of you love this book, or at least one character in the book. Yeah, you know, you never know with stuff like this. This is one of those things where, like, this has kind of been in the public consciousness a lot, because a lot of celebrities are kind of trying to do stuff like this, like LeVar Burton was trying to sort of do a little impromptu Reading Rainbow-like thing where he, like, reads children's books live on stream to help people kind of not stress, so much during this whole hot mess. But that turns out to be, like, this absolute, like, you know, peat bog of legal complications, because you gotta kind of get permission from every publisher, and any one of them can be like, yeah, you shouldn't have did that. Now you're in legal trouble with us. So people have been sort of talking about this a lot more lately, which is fun. But also, it's totally up to the publisher and the rights owner whether or not to actually complain about this. Like, Neil Gaiman went on record to say that people can read any of his stories live during this, because he's not going to be a jerk about it, which is very good of him. But yeah, so there's no telling. We'll see if this works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We gave it a shot, and hopefully we all had a good time for what we had. Speaking of what we had, it's showing the hour, so let's get back into it. As a quick recap, in the first quarter or so of this book, a sneaky occultist society has started summoning a dragon into Ankh-Morpork in the hopes of luring the one true king. Coincidentally, a very stoic, lawful good dude has rolled into town and has become a cop, not a king, and the depressed alcoholic captain of the Night Watch, Sam Vimes, is starting to put some pieces together and do some detective work, and there is also an orangutan. Anyway. In the privacy of the oblong office, his personal sanctum, the patrician paced up and down. He was dictating a stream of instructions. "And send some men to paint that wall," he finished. Lupine Wance raised an eyebrow. "Is that wise, sir?" he said. "You don't think a frieze of ghastly shadows will cause comment and speculation?" said the patrician sourly. "Not as much as fresh paint in the shades," said Wance evenly. The patrician hesitated a moment. "Good point," he snapped. "Have some men demolish it." He reached the end of the room, spun on his heel, and stalked up again. Dragons, as if there were not enough real things to take up his time. "Do you believe in dragons?" he said. Wance shook his head. "They're impossible, sir. So I've heard, said Lord Vetinari. He reached the opposite wall, turned. Would you like me to investigate further, said Once. Yes, do so. And I shall ensure the watch take great care, said Once. The patrician stopped his pacing. The watch? The watch? My dear chap, the watch are a bunch of incompetents commanded by a drunkard. It's taken me years to achieve it. The last thing we need to concern ourselves with is the watch. He thought for a moment. Ever seen a dragon once? One of the big ones, I mean? Oh, they're impossible, you said. They're just legend, really. Superstition, said Once. Said the patrician. And the thing about legends, of course, is that they are legendary. Exactly, sir. Even so, the patrician paused and stared at Once for some time. Oh well, he said. Sort it out. I'm not having any of this dragon business. It's the type of thing that makes people restless. Put a stop to it. When he was alone, he stood and looked out gloomily over the twin city. It was drizzling again. Ankh-Morpork, brawling city of 100,000 souls, and, as the patrician privately observed, 10 times that number of actual people. The fresh rain glistened on the panorama of towers and rooftops, all unaware of the teeming, rancorous world it was dropping into. Luckier rain fell on upland sheep, or whispered gently over forests, or pattered somewhat incestuously into the sea. Rain that fell on Ankh-Morpork, though, was rain that was in trouble. They did terrible things to water in Ankh-Morpork. Being drunk was only the start of its problems. The patrician liked to feel that he was looking out over a city that worked. Not a beautiful city, or a renowned city, or a well-drained city, and certainly not an architecturally favored city. Even its most enthusiastic citizens would agree that, from a high point of vantage, Ankh-Morpork looked as though someone had tried to achieve in stone and wood an effect normally associated with the pavements outside all-night takeaways. But it worked. It spun along cheerfully like a gyroscope on the lip of a catastrophic curve. And this, the patrician firmly believed, was because no one group was ever powerful enough to push it over. Merchants, thieves, assassins, wizards, all competed energetically in the race without really realizing that it needn't be a race at all, and certainly not trusting one another enough to stop and wonder who had marked out the course and was holding the starting flag. The patrician disliked the word dictator. It affronted him. He never told anyone what to do. He didn't have to. That was the wonderful part. A large part of his life consisted of arranging matters so that this state of affairs continued. Of course, there were various groups seeking his overthrow, and this was right and proper and the sign of a vigorous and healthy society. No one could call him unreasonable about the matter. Why hadn't he founded most of them himself? And what was so beautiful was the ways in which they spent nearly all their time bickering with one another. Human nature, the patrician always said, was a marvelous thing, once you understood where its levers were. He had an unpleasant premonition about this dragon business. If ever there was a creature that didn't have any obvious levers, it was a dragon. It would have to be sorted out. The patrician didn't believe in unnecessary cruelty. Footnote, while being bang alongside the idea of necessary cruelty, of course. He did not believe in pointless revenge, but he was a great believer in the need for things to be sorted out. Funnily enough, Captain Vimes was thinking the same thing. He found he didn't like the idea of citizens, even of the shades, being turned into a mere ceramic tint. And it had been done in front of the watch, more or less, as if the watch didn't matter, as if the watch was just an irrelevant detail. That was what rankled. Of course it was true, and that only made it worse. What was making him even angrier was that he had disobeyed orders. He'd scuffed up the tracks, certainly, but in the bottom drawer of his ancient desk, hidden under a pile of empty bottles, was a plaster cast. He could feel it staring at him through 3 layers of wood. He couldn't imagine what had got into him, and now he was going even further out on the limb. He reviewed his, for want of a better word, troops. He'd asked the senior pair to turn up in plain clothes. This meant that Sergeant Colin, who'd worn uniform all his life, was looking red-faced and uncomfortable in the suit he wore for funerals, whereas Nobby— "I wonder if I made the word plain clear enough," said Captain Vimes. "It's what I wear outside of work, Gov," said Nobby reproachfully. "Sir," corrected Sergeant Colin. "My voice is in plain clothes too," said Nobby. "Initiative, that is." Vimes walked slowly around the corporal. "And your plain clothes do not cause old women to faint and small boys to run after you in the street," he said. Nobby shifted uneasily. He wasn't at home with irony. "No, sir, Gov," he said. "It's all the go, this style." This was broadly true. There was a current fad in Ankh for big feathered hats, ruffs, slashed doublets with gold frogging, flared pantaloons, and boots with ornamental spurs. The trouble was, Vimes reflected, that most of the fashion-conscious had more body to go between these component bits, whereas all that could be said of Corporal Nobbs was that he was in there somewhere. It might be advantageous. After all, absolutely no one would ever believe, when they saw him coming down the street, that here was a member of the watch trying to look inconspicuous. It occurred to Vimes that he knew absolutely nothing about Nobbs outside working hours. He couldn't even remember where the man lived. All these years he'd known the man, and he'd never realized that in his secret private life, Corporal Nobbs was a bit of a peacock. A very short peacock, it was true, a peacock that had been hit repeatedly with something heavy, perhaps, but a peacock nonetheless. It just went to show you never could tell. He brought his attention back to the business in hand. I want you two, he said to Nobbs and Colin, to mingle unobtrusively, or obtrusively in your case, Corporal Nobbs, with people tonight and, see if you can detect anything unusual. Unusual like what? Said the sergeant. Vimes hesitated. He wasn't exactly sure himself. Anything, he said, pertinent. Ah, the sergeant nodded wisely. Pertinent, right. There was an awkward silence. Maybe people have seen weird things, said Captain Vimes, or perhaps there have been unexplained fires or footprints. You know, he finished desperately, signs of dragons. You mean like piles of gold would have been slept on, said the sergeant. And virgins being chained to rocks, said Nobbs knowingly. I can see you're experts, sighed Vimes. Just do the best you can. This mingling, said Sergeant Colin delicately. It would involve going into taverns and drinking and similar, would it? To a certain extent, said Vimes. Ah, said the sergeant happily. In moderation. Right you are, sir. And at your own expense. Oh. But before you go, said the captain, do either of you know anyone who might know anything about dragons? Apart from sleeping on gold and the bit with the young women, I mean. Wizards would, volunteered Nobby. Apart from wizards, said Vimes firmly. You couldn't trust wizards. Every guard knew you couldn't trust wizards. They were even worse than civilians. Colin thought about it. There's always Lady Ramkin, he said. Lives in Scoon Alley. Breeds, swamp dragons. You know, the little buggers people keep as pets? Oh, her, said Vimes gloomily. I think I've seen her around. The one with the Winnie if you love dragons sticker on the back of her carriage? That's, she's mental, said Sergeant Colin. What do you want? Sorry. What do you want me to do, sir? Said Carrot. You have the most important job, said Vimes hurriedly. I want you to stay here and watch the office. Carrot's face broadened in a slow, unbelieving grin. You mean I'm left in charge, sir? He said. In a manner of speaking, said Vimes. But you're not allowed to arrest anyone, understand? He added quickly. Not even if they're breaking the law, sir? Not even then. Just make a note of it. I'll read my book then, said Carrot, and polish my helmet. Good boy, said the captain. It should be safe enough, he thought. No one ever comes in here, not even to report a lost dog. No one ever thinks about the watch. You'd have to be really out of touch to go to the watch for help, he thought bitterly. Scoon Avenue was a wide, tree-lined, and incredibly select part of Ankh, high enough above the river to be away from its all-pervading smell. Excuse me. People in Scoon Avenue had old money, which was supposed to be much better than new money, although Captain Vimes had never had enough of either to spot the difference. People in Scoon Avenue had their own personal bodyguards. People in Scoon Avenue were said to be so aloof they wouldn't even talk to the gods. This was a slight slander. They would talk to gods if they were well-bred gods of decent family. Lady Ramkin's house was not hard to find. It commanded an outcrop that gave it a magnificent view of the city, if that was your idea of a good time. There were stone dragons on the gatepost, and the gardens had that unkempt, overgrown look. Statues of Ramkins long gone loomed up out of the greenery. Most of them had swords and were covered in ivy up to the neck. Vimes sensed that this was not because the garden's owner was too poor to do anything about it, but rather that the garden's owner thought that there were much more important things than ancestors, which was a pretty unusual point of view for an aristocrat. They also apparently thought that there were more important things than property repair. When he rang the bell of the rather pleasant old house itself, in the middle of a flourishing rhododendron forest, several bits of the plaster facade fell off. That seemed to be the only effect, except that something round the back of the house started to howl. Some things. It started to rain again. After a while, Vimes felt the dignity of his position and cautiously edged around the building, keeping well back in case anything collapsed. He reached a heavy wooden gate and a heavy wooden wall. In contrast with the general decrepitude of the rest of the place, it seemed comparatively new and very solid. He knocked. This caused another fusillade of strange whistling noises. The door opened. Something dreadful loomed over him. "Ah, good man! Do you know anything about mating?" it boomed. It was quiet and warm in the watch house. Carrot listened to the hissing of sand in the hourglass and concentrated on buffing up his best breastplate. Centuries of tarnish had given up under his cheerful onslaught. It gleamed. You knew where you were with a shiny breastplate. The strangeness of the city, where they had all these laws and concentrated on ignoring them, was too much for him, but a shiny breastplate was a breastplate well shined. The door opened. He peered across the top of the ancient desk. There was no one there. He tried a few more industrious rubs. There was the vague sound of someone who had got fed up with waiting. 2 purple fingernailed hands grasped the edge of the desk, and the librarian's face rose slowly into view like an early morning coconut. "Ook," he said. Carrot stared. It had been explained to him carefully that, contrary to appearances, laws governing the animal kingdom did not apply to the librarian. On the other hand, the librarian himself was never very interested in obeying the laws governing the human kingdom either. He was one of those little anomalies you have to build around. "Hello," said Carrot uncertainly. Don't call him boy or pat him, that always gets him annoyed. "Ook." The librarian prodded the desk with a long, many-jointed finger. "What? Ook." "Sorry?" The librarian rolled his eyes. It was strange, he felt, that so-called intelligent dogs, horses, and dolphins never had any difficulty indicating to humans the vital news of the moment, e.g. that the 3 children were lost in the cave, or the train was about to take the line leading to the bridge that had been washed away, or similar, while he, only a handful of chromosomes away from wearing a vest, found it difficult to persuade the average human to come in out of the rain. He just couldn't talk to some people. "Ook," he said, and beckoned. "I can't leave the office," said Carrot. "I've had orders." The librarian's upper lip rolled back like a blind. "Is that a smile?" said Carrot. The librarian shook his head. "Someone hasn't committed a crime, have they?" said Carrot. "Ook. A bad crime? Ook. Like murder? Eek. Worse than murder? Eek!" The librarian knuckled over to the door and bounced up and down urgently. Carrot gulped. Orders were orders, yes, but this was something else. The people in this city were capable of anything. He buckled on his breastplate, screwed his sparkling helmet onto his head, and strode towards the door. Then he remembered his responsibilities. He went back out to the desk, found a scrap of paper, and painstakingly wrote, "Out fighting crime. Please call again later. Thank you." And then he went out on the streets, untarnished and unafraid. Whew! How you guys doing real quick? Chat is just full of ooks. Very nice. Quick tea break. Okay. The Supreme Grand Master raised his arms. "Brethren," he said, "let us begin." It was so easy. All you had to do was channel that great septic reservoir of jealousy and cringing resentment that the brothers had in such abundance, harness their dreadful mundane unpleasantness, which had a force greater in its way than roaring evil, and then open your own mind into the place where the dragons went. Vimes found himself grabbed by the arm and pulled inside, the heavy door shut behind him with a definite click. "It's Lord Mountjoy Gayscale Talenthrust III of Ankh," said the apparition, which was dressed in huge and fearsomely padded armor. "You know, I really don't think he can cut the mustard." "He can't," said Vimes, backing away. "It really needs 2 of you." "It does, doesn't it?" whispered Vimes, his shoulder blades trying to carve their way out through the fence. "Could you oblige?" boomed the thing. "What? Oh, don't be squeamish, man. You just have to help him up into the air. It's me who has the tricky part. I know it's cruel, but if he can't manage it tonight, then he's for the choppy chop. Survival of the fittest and all that, don't you know?" Captain Vimes managed to get a grip on himself. He was clearly in the presence of some sex-crazed would-be murderess, insofar as any gender could be determined under the strange, lumpy garments. If it wasn't female, then references to "it's me who has the tricky part" gave rise to mental images that would haunt him for some time to come. He knew the rich did things differently, but this was going too far. "Madam," he said coldly, "I am an officer of the watch, and I must warn you that the course of action you are suggesting breaks the laws of the city, and also several of the more straight-laced gods," he added silently, "and I must advise you that his lordship should be released unharmed immediately." The figure stared at him in astonishment. "Why?" it said. "It's my bloody dragon." "Have another drink, not Corporal Nobby," said Sergeant Colin unsteadily. "I do not mind if I do, not Sergeant Colin," said Nobby. They were taking inconspicuosity very seriously. That ruled out most of the taverns on the Moorpork side of the river, where they were very well known. Now they were in a rather elegant one in downtown Ankh, where they were being as unobtrusive as they knew how. The other drinkers thought they were some kind of cabaret. "I was thinking," said Sergeant Colin. "What?" "If we bought a bottle or 2, we could go home, and then we'd be really inconspicuous." Nobby gave this some thought. "But he said we've got to keep our ears open," he said. "We're supposed to," he said, "detect anything." "We can do that at my house," said Sergeant Colin. "We can listen all night, really hard." "That's a good point," said Nobby. In fact, it sounded better and better the more he thought about it. "But first," he announced, "I got to pay a visit." "Me too," said the sergeant. "This detecting business gets to you after a while, doesn't it?" They stumbled out into the alley behind the tavern. There was a full moon up, but a few rags of scruffy cloud were drifting across it. The pair inconspicuously bumped into one another in the darkness. "Is that you, Detector Sergeant Colin?" said Nobby. That's right. Now can you detect the door to the privy, Detector Corporal Nobbs? We're looking for a short, dark door of mean appearance, ha ha ha. There were a couple of clanks and a muffled swear word from Nobby as he staggered across the alley, followed by a yowl when one of Ankh-Morpork's enormous population of feral cats fled between his legs. "Who loves you, pussycat?" said Nobby under his breath. "Needs must, then," said Sergeant Colin, and faced a handy corner. His private musings were interrupted by a grunt from the corporal. "You there, Sergeant?" "Detector Sergeant to you, Nobby," said Sergeant Colin pleasantly. Nobby's tone was urgent and suddenly very sober. "Don't piss about, Sergeant. I just saw a dragon fly over." "I've seen a horse fly," said Sergeant Colin, hiccuping gently, "and I've seen a house fly. I've even seen a green fly, but I ain't never seen a dragon fly." "Of course you have, you pillock," said Nobby urgently. "Look, I'm not messing about. He had wings on him like great big wings." Sergeant Colin turned majestically. The corporal's face had gone so white that it showed up in the darkness. "Honest, Sergeant?" Sergeant Colin turned his eyes to the damp sky and the rain-washed moon. "All right," he said. "Show me." There was a slithering noise behind him, and a couple of roof tiles smashed onto the street. He turned, and there on the roof was the dragon. "There's a dragon on the roof," he warbled. "Nobby, there's a dragon on the roof! What shall I do, Nobby? There's a dragon on the roof. It's looking right at me, Nobby." "For a start, you could do up your trousers," said Nobby from behind the nearest wall. Even shorn of her layers of protective clothing, Lady Sybil Ramkin was still toweringly big. Vimes knew that the barbarian Hublander folk had legends about great chain-mailed, armor-broad, car-horse-riding maidens who swooped down on battlefields and carried off dead warriors on their cropper to a glorious, roistering afterlife while singing in a pleasing mezzo-soprano. Lady Ramkin could have been one of them. She could have led them. She could have carried off a battalion. When she spoke, every word was like a hearty slap on the back and clanged with the aristocratic self-assurance of the totally well-bred. The vowel sounds alone would have cut teak. Vime's ragged forebears were used to voices like that, usually from heavily armored people on the back of a war charger telling them why it would be a jolly good idea, don't you know, to charge the enemy and hit them for 6. His legs wanted to stand to attention. Prehistoric men would have worshipped her, and in fact had amazingly managed to carve lifelike statues of her thousands of years ago. She had a mass of chestnut hair, a wig, Vimes learned later. No one who had much to do with dragons kept their own hair for long. She also had a dragon on her shoulder. It had been introduced as Talon-thrust Vincent Wonderkind of Quirm, referred to as Vinny, and seemed to be making a large contribution to the unusual chemical smell that pervaded the house. This smell permeated everything. Even the generous slice of cake she offered him tasted of it. Oh, wait, no. Even the generous slice of cake she offered him tasted of it. There we go. Sentences. "The shoulder, it looks very nice," he said, desperate to make conversation. "Rubbish," said her ladyship. "I'm just trading him up because shoulder-sitters fetch twice the price." Vimes murmured that he had occasionally seen society ladies with small, colorful dragons on their shoulders and thought it looked very, nice. "Oh, it sounds nice," she said, "I'll grant you. Then they realize it means soot burns, frizzled hair, and crap all down their back. Those talons dig in, too. And then they think the thing's getting too big and smelly, and the next thing you know, it's either down to the Morpork Sunshine Sanctuary for Lost Dragons or the old heave-ho into the river with a rope round your neck. Poor little buggers." She sat down, arranging a skirt that could have made sails for a small fleet. "Now then, Captain Vimes, was it?" Vimes was at a loss. Ramkins, long dead, stared down at him from ornate frames high on the shadowy walls. Between, around, and under the portraits were the weapons they'd presumably used, and had used well and often by the looks of them. Suits of armor stood in dented ranks along the walls. Quite a number, he couldn't help noticing, had large holes in them. The ceiling was a faded riot of moth-eaten banners. You did not need forensic examination to understand that Lady Ramkin's ancestors had never shirked a fight. It was amazing that she was capable of doing something so unwarlike as having a cup of tea. "My forebears," she said, following his hypnotized gaze. "You know, not one Ramkin in the last 1,000 years has died in his bed." "Yes, ma'am." "Source of family pride, that." "Yes, ma'am." "Quite a few of them have died in other people's, of course." Captain Vimes's teacup rattled in its saucer. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Captain is such a dashing title, I've always thought." She gave him a bright, brittle smile. "I mean, colonels and so on are always so stuffy, majors are pompous, but one always feels somehow that there is something delightfully dangerous about a captain. What was it you had to show me?" Vimes gripped his parcel like a chastity belt. "I wondered," he faltered, "how big swamp... He stopped. Something dreadful was happening to his lower regions. Lady Ramkin followed his gaze. "Oh, take no notice of him," she said cheerfully. "Hit him with a cushion if he's a bother." A small elderly dragon had crawled out from under his chair and placed its jowly muzzle in Vimes's lap. It stared up at him soulfully with big brown eyes and gently dribbled something quite corrosive by the feel of it over his knees, and it stank like the ring around an acid bath. "That's Dewdrop Maybelline Talenthrust the First," said her ladyship, "champion and sire of champions. No fire left now, poor soppy old thing. He likes his belly rubbed." Vimes made surreptitiously vicious jerking motions to dislodge the old dragon. It blinked mournfully at him with rheumy eyes and rolled back the corner of its mouth, exposing a picket fence of soot-blackened teeth. "Just push him off if he's a nuisance," said Lady Ramkin cheerfully. "Now then, what was it you were asking about?" "I was wondering how big swamp dragons grow," said Vimes, trying to shift position. There was a faint growling noise. "You came all the way up here to ask me that? Well, I seem to recall Gayheart Talenthrust of Ankh stood 14 thumbs high, toe to matlock," mused Lady Ramkin. About 3 foot 6 inches, she added kindly. "No bigger than that?" said Vimes hopefully. In his lap, the old dragon began to snore gently. "Golly, no. He was a bit of a freak, actually. Mostly don't get much bigger than 8 thumbs. Captain Vimes's lips moved in hurried calculation. 2 feet, he ventured. "Well done. That's the cobs, of course. The hens are a bit smaller." Captain Vimes wasn't going to give in. "A cob would be a male dragon?" "Only after the age of 2 years, said Lady Ramkin triumphantly. "Up to the age of 8 months he's a pumet, then he's a cock until 14 months, and then he's a snood." Captain Vimes sat entranced, eating the horrible cake, breeches gradually dissolving as the stream of information flooded over him. How the males fought with flame, but in the laying season only the hens breathed fire. Footnote, only until their 3rd clutch, of course. After that, they're dams. From the combustion of complex internal gases to incubate the eggs which needed such a fierce temperature, while the males gathered firewood, a group of swamp dragons was a slump or an embarrassment, a female was capable of laying up to 3 clutches of 4 eggs every year, most of which were trodden on by absent-minded males. Excuse me. And the dragons of both sexes were vaguely uninterested in one another, and indeed everything except firewood, except for about once every 2 months when they became as single-minded as a buzzsaw. He was helpless to prevent himself being taken out to the kennels at the back, outfitted from neck to ankle in leather armor faced with steel plates, and ushered into the long, low building where the whistling had come from. The temperature was terrible, but not as bad as the cocktail of smells. He staggered aimlessly from one metal-lined pen to another, while pear-shaped, squeaking little horrors with red eyes were introduced as Moonpenny Duchess Marchpane, who's gravid at the moment, and Moon Miss Talenthrust II, who was best of breed at Sutopolis last year. Jets of pale green flame played across his knees. Many of the stalls had rosettes and certificates pinned over them. "And this one, I'm afraid, is Good Boy Bindle Featherstone of Quirm," said Lady Ramkin relentlessly. Vimes stared groggily over the charred barrier at the small creature curled up in the middle of the floor. It bore about the same resemblance to the rest of them as Nobby did to the average human being. Something in its ancestry had given it a pair of eyebrows that were about the same size as its stubby wings, which could never have supported it in the air. Its head was the wrong shape, like an anteater. It had nostrils like jet intakes. If it ever managed to get airborne, the things would have the drag of twin parachutes. It was also turning on Captain Vimes the most silently intelligent look he'd ever had from any animal, including Corporal Nobbs. "It happens," said Lady Ramkin sadly. "It's all down to genes, you know." "It is," said Vimes. Somehow the creature seemed to be concentrating all the power its siblings wasted in flame and noise into a stare like a thermic lance. He couldn't help remembering how much he'd wanted a puppy when he was a little boy. Mind you, they'd been starving. Anything with meat on it would have done. He heard the dragon lady say, "One tries to breed for a good flame, depth of scale, correct color, and so on. One just has to put up with the occasional total whittle." The little dragon turned on Vimes a gaze that would be guaranteed to win it the award for dragon the judges would most like to take home and use as a portable gas lighter. Total whittle, Vimes thought. He wasn't sure of the precise meaning of the word, but he could hazard a shrewd guess. It sounded like whatever it was you had left when you extracted everything of any value whatsoever. Like the watch, he thought. Total whittles, every one of them. And just like him. It was the saga of his life. "That's nature for you," said her ladyship. "Of course I wouldn't dream of breeding from him, but he wouldn't be able to anyway." "Why not?" said Vimes. "Because dragons have to mate in the air, and he'll never be able to fly with those wings, I'm afraid. I'll be sorry to lose the bloodline, naturally. His sire was Brenda Robley's Treebright Brightscale. Do you know Brenda?" No," said Vimes. Lady Ramkin was one of those people who assumed that everyone else knew everyone one knew. "Charming gal. Anyway, his brothers and sisters are shaping up very well." Poor little bastard, thought Vimes. That's nature for you in a nutshell, always dealing off the bottom of the pack. No wonder they call her a mother. "You said you had something to show me?" Lady Ramkin prompted. Vimes wordlessly handed her the parcel. She slipped off her heavy mittens and unwrapped it. "Plaster cast of a footprint," she said baldly. "Well?" Doesn't remind you of anything? Said Vimes. Could be a wading bird. Oh, Vimes was crestfallen. Lady Ramkin laughed. Or a really big dragon. Got it out of a museum, did you? No, I got it off the street this morning. Huh? Someone's been playing tricks on you, old chap. There was circumstantial evidence. He told her. She stared at him. Draco nobilis, she said hoarsely. Pardon? Said Vimes. Draco nobilis, the noble dragon. As opposed to these fellows, she waved a hand in the direction of the massed ranks of whistling lizards. Draco vulgaris, the lot of them. But the big ones are all gone, you know. This really is a nonsense. No two ways about it. All gone. Beautiful things they were, weighed tons. Biggest things ever to fly. No one knows how they did it. And then they realized it was suddenly very quiet. All along the rows of kennels, the dragons were silent, bright-eyed, and watchful. They were staring at the roof. Whew, cliffhanger. Excuse me. Quick break for tea and browse the chat. You guys are having fun? Awesome. Okay. Glad you guys are having a good time so far. 1,400 of you. Hello. Nice to meet you. Okay. Carrot looked around him. Shelves stretched away in every direction. On those shelves, books. He made a calculated guess. This is the library, isn't it? He said. The librarian maintained his gentle but firm grip on the boy's hand and led him along the maze of aisles. Is there a body? Said Carrot. There'd have to be. Worse than murder. A body in a library. It could lead to anything. The ape eventually padded to a halt in front of a shelf no different than, it seemed, 100 others. Some of the books were chained up. There was a gap. The librarian pointed to it. Ook. Well, what about it? A hole where a book should be? Ook. A book has been taken. A book has been taken? You summoned the watch? Carrot drew himself up proudly. Because someone's taken a book? You think that's worse than murder? The librarian gave him the kind of look other people would reserve for people who said things like, what's so bad about genocide? This is practically a criminal offense, wasting watch time, said Carrot. Why don't you just tell the head wizards or whoever they are? Wook! The librarian indicated with some surprising economical gestures that most wizards would not find their own bottoms with both hands. Well, I don't see what we can do about it, said Carrot. What's the book called? The librarian scratched his head. This one was going to be tricky. He faced Carrot, put his leather glove hands together, then folded them open. I know it's a book. What's its name? The librarian sighed and held up a hand. 4 words? Said Carrot. First word. The ape pinched 2 wrinkled fingers together. Small word. A. The. Ook. The. Second word. The third word. Small word. The. A. To. Of. The something of something. Second word. What? Oh, first syllable. Fingers? Touching your fingers. Thumbs? The orangutan growled and tugged theatrically at one large hairy ear. Oh, sounds like. Fingers? Hand? Adding up. Sums. Cut off. Smaller word. Some? Second syllable. Small. Very small syllable. A. In. On. Some. On. Some on. Summon. Summoner. Summoning. The summoning of something. This is fun, isn't it? Fourth word. Whole word. He peered intently as the librarian gyrated mysteriously. Big thing. Huge big thing. Flapping. Great big flapping leaping thing. Teeth. Huffing. Blowing. Great big huge blowing flapping thing. Sweat broke out on Carrot's forehead as he tried obediently to understand. Sucking fingers thing. Burnt, hot, great big hot blowing flapping thing. The librarian rolled his eyes. Homo sapiens, you could keep it. The great dragon danced and spun and trod the air over the city. Its color was moonlight gleaming off its scales. Sometimes it would twist and glide with deceptive speed over the rooftops for the sheer joy of existing. And it was all wrong, Vimes thought. Part of him was marveling at the sheer beauty of the sight, but an insistent, weaselly little group of brain cells from the wrong side of the synapses was scrawling its graffiti on the walls of wonderment. It's a bloody great lizard, they jeered. Must weigh tons. Nothing that big can fly, not even on beautiful wings. And what is a flying lizard doing with great big scales on its back? 500 feet above him, a lance of blue-white flame roared into the sky. It can't do something like that. It'd burn its own lips off. Beside him, Lady Ramkin stood with her mouth open. Behind her, the little caged dragons yammered and howled. The great beast turned in the air and swooped over the rooftops. The flame darted out again. Below it, yellow flames sprang up. It was done so quietly and stylishly that it took Vimes several seconds to realize that several buildings had in fact been set on fire. "Golly," said Lady Ramkin, "look, it's using the thermals. That's what the fire is for." She turned to Vimes, her eyes hopelessly aglow. "Do you realize we're probably seeing something that no one has seen for centuries?" "Yes, it's a bloody flying alligator setting fire to my city!" shouted Vimes. She wasn't listening to him. "There must be a breeding colony somewhere," she said. "After all this time, where do you think it lives?" Vimes didn't know, but he swore to himself he would find out and ask it some very serious questions. "One egg," breathed the breeder. "Just let me get my hands on one egg." Vimes stared at her in genuine astonishment. It dawned on him that he was very probably a flawed character. Below them, another building exploded into flame. "How far exactly," he said, speaking very slowly and carefully, as to a child, "did these things fly?" "They're very territorial animals," murmured her ladyship. "According to legend, they—" Vimes realized he was in for another dose of dragon lore. "Just give me the facts, milady," he said impatiently. "Not very far, really," she said, slightly taken aback. "Thank you very much, ma'am. You've been very helpful," muttered Vimes, and broke into a run. Somewhere in the city. There was nothing outside for miles except low fields and swamp. It had to be living somewhere in the city. His sandals flapped on the cobbles as he hurtled down the streets. Somewhere in the city, which was totally ridiculous, of course. Totally ridiculous and impossible. He didn't deserve this. Of all the cities in all the world it could have flown into, he thought, it's flown into mine. By the time he reached the river, the dragon had vanished, but a pall of smoke was hanging over the streets, and several human bucket chains had been formed to pass lumps of the river to the stricken buildings. Footnote: the Guild of Firefighters had been outlawed by the patrician the previous year after many complaints. The point was that if you brought a contract from the guild, your house would be protected against fire. Unfortunately, the general Ankh-Morpork ethos quickly became to the fore, and firefighters... The general Ankh-Morpork ethos quickly came to the fore, and firefighters would tend to go to prospective clients' house in groups, making loud comments like, "Very inflammable-looking place, this," and probably go up like a firework with just one carelessly dropped match. Know what I mean? End footnote. The job was considerably hampered by the droves of people streaming out of the streets, carrying their possessions. Most of the city was wood and thatch, and they weren't taking any chances. In fact, the danger was surprisingly small, mysteriously small when you came to think about it. Vimes had surreptitiously taken to carrying a notebook these days, and he had noted the damage as if the mere act of writing it down somehow made the world a more understandable place. Item: a coach house belonging to an inoffensive businessman who had seen his new carriage go up in flames. Item: a small vegetable shop with pinpoint accuracy. Vimes wondered about that. He'd bought some apples in there once, and there didn't appear to be anything about it that a dragon could possibly take offense at. Still, very considerate of the dragon, he thought as he made his way to the watch house. When you think of all the timber yards, hayricks, thatched roofs, and oil stores it could have hit by chance, it's managed to really frighten everyone without actually harming the city. Rays of early morning sunlight were piercing the drifts of smoke as he pushed open the door. This was home. Not the bare little room over the candlemaker's shop in Wixon Alley where he slept, but this nasty brown room that smelt of unswept chimneys. Sergeant Colin's pipe, Nobby's mysterious personal problem, and, latterly, Carrot's armor polish. It was almost like home. No one else was there. He wasn't entirely surprised. He clumped up to his office and leaned back in his chair, whose cushion would have been thrown out of its basket in disgust by an incontinent dragon, pulled his helmet over his eyes, and tried to think. No good rushing about. The dragon had vanished in all the smoke and confusion as suddenly as it had come. Time for rushing about soon enough. The important thing was working out where to rush to. He'd been right. Waiting bird. But where do you start looking for a bloody great dragon in a city of 1 million people? He was aware that his right hand, entirely unbidden, had pulled open the bottom drawer, and 3 of his fingers, acting on sealed orders from his hindbrain, had lifted out a bottle. It was one of those bottles that emptied themselves. Reason told him that sometimes he must occasionally start one, break the seal, see amber liquids glistening all the way up to the neck. It was just that he couldn't remember the sensation. It was as if the bottles arrived, 2/3 empty. He stared at the label. It seemed to be Jimkin Bearhugger's Old Selected Dragon's Blood whiskey. Cheap and powerful. You could light fires with it. You could clean spoons. You didn't have to drink much of it to be drunk, which was just as well. It was Nobby who shook him awake with the news that there was a dragon in the city, and also that Sergeant Colin had had a nasty turn. Vimes sat and blinked owlishly while the words washed around him. Apparently, having a fire-breathing lizard focusing interestedly on one's nether regions from a distance of a few feet can upset the strongest constitution. An experience like that could leave a lasting mark on a person. Vimes was still digesting this when Carrot turned up with the librarian swinging along behind him. Did you see it? Did you see it? He said. We all saw it, said Vimes. I know all about it, said Carrot triumphantly. Someone's brought it here with magic. Someone's stolen a book out of the library, and guess what it's called? Can't even begin to, said Vimes weakly. It's called The Summoning of Dragons. Ook, confirmed the librarian. Oh, what's it about? Said Vimes. The librarian rolled his eyes. It's about how to summon dragons, by magic. Ook. And that's illegal, that is, said Carrot happily. Releasing feral creatures upon the streets, contrary to the wild animals, public, Vimes groaned. That meant wizards. You got nothing but trouble with wizards. I suppose, he said, there wouldn't be another copy of this book around, would there? Ooh, the librarian shook his head. And you wouldn't happen to know what's in it? Vimes sighed. What? Oh, 4 words, he said wearily. First word sounds like bend. Bow, sow, co, cow, how. Second word, small word, to. Yes, understood, but I meant in any kind of detail? No, I see. What are we going to do now, sir? Said Carrot anxiously. It's out there, intoned Nobby. Gone to ground like during the hours of daylight. Coiled up in its secret lair on top of a great hoard of gold, dreaming ancient reptilian dreams from a dawn of time, waiting for the secret curtains of the night, where once more we'll sally forth. He hesitated and added sullenly, What are you all looking at me that fat for? Very poetic, said Carrot. Well, everyone knows the real old dragons used to go to sleep on a hoard of gold, said Nobby. Well-known folk myth. Vimes looked blankly into the immediate future. Vile though Nobby was, he also was a great indication of what was going through the mind of the average citizen. You could use him as a sort of laboratory rat to forecast what was going to happen next. I expect you'd be really interested in finding out where that hoard was, wouldn't you? Said Vimes experimentally. Nobby looked even more shifty than usual. Well, Captain, I was thinking of having a bit of a look around, when I'm off duty, of course, he added virtuously. Oh dear, said Captain Vimes. He lifted up the empty bottle and, with great care, put it back in the drawer. The elucidated brethren were nervous. A kind of fear crackled from brother to brother. It was the fear of someone who, having cheerfully experimented with pouring the powder and wadding the ball, had found that pulling the trigger had led to a god-awful bang, and pretty soon someone is bound to come and see who's making all the noise. Oh, excuse me. The Supreme Grand Master knew that he had them, though. Sheep and lamb. Since they couldn't do anything much worse than they had already done, they might as well press on and damn the world, and pretend they'd wanted it like this all along. Oh, the joy of it. Only Brother Plasterer was actually happy. Let that be a lesson to all oppressive vegetable sellers, he kept saying. Yes, said Brother Doorkeeper, only the thing is, there's no chance of us sort of accidentally summoning the dragon here, is there? We have it under perfect control, said the Supreme Grand Master smoothly. The power is ours, I can assure you. The brothers cheered up a little bit. And now, the Supreme Grand Master continued, there is the matter of the king. The brothers looked solemn, except for Brother Plasterer. Have we found him then? He said. That's a stroke of luck. You never listen, do you? Snapped Brother Watchtower. It was all explained last week. We don't go around finding anyone. We make a king. I thought he was supposed to turn up, because of destiny. Brother Watchtower snickered. We sort of helped destiny along a little bit. The Supreme Grand Master smiled in the depths of his robe. It was amazing, this mystic business. You tell them a lie, and then when you don't need it anymore, you tell them another lie, and tell them they're progressing along the road to wisdom. Then, instead of laughing, they follow you even more, hoping that at the heart of all the lies, they'll find the truth. And bit by bit, they accept the unacceptable. Amazing. Bloody hell, that's clever, said Brother Doorkeeper. How do we do that, then? Look, the Supreme Grand Master said we find some handsome lad who's good at taking orders, he kills the dragon, and Bob's your uncle. Simple. Much more intelligent than waiting for a so-called real king. But Brother Plasterer seemed deep in the toils of cerebration. If we control the dragon, and we do control the dragon, right? Then we don't need anyone killing it. We just stop summoning it, and everyone will be happy, right? Oh, yes, said Brother Watchtower nastily. I can just see it, can you? We just trot out, say, hello, we won't set fire to your houses anymore, aren't we nice, do we? The whole point about the thing with the king is that it'll be sort of a sort of undeniably potent and romantic symbol of absolute authority, said the Supreme Grand Master smoothly. That's it, said the Brother Watchtower, a potent authority. Oh, I see, said Brother Plasterer. Right, okay, that's what the king will be. That's it, said Brother Watchtower. No one's going to argue with a potent authority, are they? Too right, said Brother Watchtower. Stroke of luck, then, finding the true king right now, said Brother Plasterer. 1,000,000 to 1 chance, really. We haven't found the right king. We don't need the right king, said the Supreme Grand Master wearily. For the last time, I've just found us a likely lad who looks good in a crown and can take orders and knows how to flourish a sword. Now just listen. Flourishing, of course, was important. It didn't have much to do with wielding. Wielding a sword, the Supreme Grand Master considered, was simply the messy business of a dynastic surgery. It was just a matter of thrust and cut, whereas a king had to flourish one. It had to catch the light in just the right way, leaving watchers in no doubt that here was destiny's chosen. He'd taken a long time preparing the sword and shield. It had been very expensive. The shield shone like $1 in a sweep's ear hole, but the sword was magnificent. It was long and shiny. It looked like something some genius of metalwork, one of those little Zen guys who works only by the light of dawn and can beat a club sandwich of folded steels into something with the cutting edge of a scalpel and the stopping power of a sex-crazed rhinoceros on bad acid, had made and then retired in tears because he'd never, ever do anything so good again. There were so many jewels on the hilt it had to be sheathed in velvet. You had to look at it through smoked glass. Just laying a hand on it practically conferred kingship. As for the lad, he was a distant cousin, keen and vain and stupid in a passably aristocratic way. Currently, he was under guard in a distant farmhouse with an adequate supply of drink and several young ladies, although what the boy seemed most interested in was mirrors. Probably hero material, the Supreme Grand Master thought glumly. I suppose, said Brother Watchtower, that he isn't the real heir to the throne. What do you mean, said the Supreme Grand Master. Well, you know how it is. Fate plays funny tricks, ha-ha. It'd be a laugh, wouldn't it, said Brother Watchtower, if this lad turned out to be the real king after all this trouble. There is no real king anymore, snapped the Supreme Grand Master. What do you expect? Some people wandering in the wilderness for hundreds of years, patiently handing down a sword and a birthmark? Some sort of magic? He spat the word. He'd make use of magic, means to an end, and justify means and so forth, but to go around believing in it, believing it had some sort of moral force like logic, made him wince. Good grief, man, be logical, be rational. Even if any of the old royal family survived, the bloodline would be so watered down by now that there must be thousands of people who lay claim to the throne. Even, he tried to think of the least likely claimant, even someone like Brother Dunnikin. He stared at the assembled brethren. I don't see him here tonight, by the way. Funny thing that, said Brother Watchtower thoughtfully. Didn't you hear? What? He got bitten by a crocodile on his way home last night. Poor little bugger. What? 1,000,000 to 1 chance. It had escaped from a menagerie or something and was lying low in his backyard. I went to feel under his doormat for his door key and it had him by the funes. Footnote, a species of geranium. End footnote. Brother Watchtower fumbled under his rope and produced a grubby brown envelope. We're having a whip round to buy him some grapes and that. I don't know whether you'd like to, Put me down for $3, said the Supreme Grand Master. Brother Watchtower nodded. Funny thing, he said. I already have. Just a few more nights, thought the Supreme Grand Master. By tomorrow, the people would be so desperate they'd crown even a one-legged troll if he got rid of the dragon. And we'll have a king, and he'll have an advisor. A trusted man, of course, and this stupid rabble can go back to the gutter. No more dressing up, no more ritual, no more summoning the dragon. I can give it up, he thought. I can give it up any time I like. The streets outside the patrician's palace were thronged. There was the manic air of a carnival. Vimes ran a practiced eye over the assortment before him. It was the usual Ankh-Morpork mob in times of crisis. Half of them were here to complain, a quarter of them were here to watch the other half, and the remainder were here to rob, importune, or sell hot dogs to the rest. There were a few new faces, though. There were a number of grim men with big swords slung over their shoulders and whips slung on their belts, striding through the crowds. News spreads quick, don't it? Observed a familiar voice by his ear. Morning, Captain. Vimes looked into the grinning, cadaverous face of cut-me-own-throat Dibbler, purveyor of absolutely anything that could be sold hurriedly from an open suitcase in a busy street, and was guaranteed to have fallen off the back of an ox cart. Morning, Throat, said Vimes absently. What are you selling? Genuine article, Captain. Throat leaned closer. He was the sort of person who could make good morning sound like a once-in-a-lifetime, never-to-be-repeated offer. His eyes swiveled back and forth in their sockets like two rodents trying to find a way out. Can't afford to be without it, he hissed. Anti-dragon cream. Personal guarantee. If you're incinerated, you get your money back, no quibble. What you're saying, said Vimes slowly, if I understand the wording correctly, is that if I am baked alive by the dragon, you'll return the money? Upon personal application, said Cut-Me-on-Throat. He unscrewed the lid from a jar of vivid green ointment and thrust it under Vimes's nose. Made from over 50 different rare spices and herbs to a recipe known only to a bunch of ancient monks what live on some mountains somewhere. $1 a jar, and I'm cutting me on throat. It's a public service, really, he added piously. You've got to hand it to those ancient monks, spurring it up so quickly, said Vimes. Clever buggers, agreed Cut-Me-on-Throat. Must be all that meditation and yak yogurt. So what's happening, Throat, said Vimes. Who are all the guys with the swords? "Dragon hunters, Captain. The patrician announced a reward of $50,000 to anyone who brings him the dragon's head. Not attached to the dragon either. He's no fool, that man." "What?" "That's what he said. It's written on all posters." $50,000? Not chicken feed, eh? "More like dragon fodder," said Vimes. "It'd bring trouble, you mark his words." "I'm amazed you're not grabbing a sword and joining in." "I'm more in what you might call the service sector, Captain." Throat looked both ways conspiratorially and then passed Vimes a slip of parchment. It said, "Anti-dragon mirror shields, 500 Ankh-Morpork dollars, portable lair detectors, 250 Ankh-Morpork dollars, dragon-piercing arrows, 100 Ankh-Morpork dollar per each, shovels, 5 Ankh-Morpork dollars, picks, 5 Ankh-Morpork dollars, sacks, 1 Ankh-Morpork dollar." Vimes handed it back. "Why the sacks?" he said. "On account of the horde," said Throat. "Oh, yes," said Vimes gloomily. "Of course." "Tell you what," said Throat. "Tell you what. For our boys in brown, 10% off." "And you're cutting your own throat, Throat?" 15% for officers," urged Throat as Vimes walked away. The cause of the slight panic in his voice was soon apparent. He had plenty of competition. The people of Ankh-Morpork were not by nature heroic, but were by nature salesmen. In the space of a few feet, Vimes could have bought any number of magical weapons, genuine certificate of authenticity with everyone, a cloak of invisibility, a good touch, he thought, and he was really impressed by the way the stall owner was using a mirror with no glass in it, and by way of lighter relief, dragon biscuits, balloons, and windmills on sticks. Copper bracelets guaranteed to bring relief from dragons were a nice thought. There seemed to be as many sacks and shovels as there were swords. Gold, that was it. The horde. Ha! $50,000. An officer of the watch earned $30 a month and had to pay to have his own dents beaten out. What he couldn't do with $50,000. Vimes thought about this for a while and then thought of the things he could do with $50,000. There were so many more of them for a start. He almost walked into a group of men clustered around a poster nailed to the wall. It declared, indeed, that the head of the dragon that had terrorized the city would be worth 50,000 Ankh-Morpork dollars to the brave hero that delivered it to the palace. One of the cluster, who from his size, weaponry, and that way he was slowly tracing the lettering with his finger, Vimes decided was a leading hero, was doing the reading for the others. "To Terher Palaki," he concluded. 50,000, said one of them reflectively, rubbing his chin. "Cheap job," said the intellectual. "Well below the rate. Should be half the kingdom in the daughter's hand in marriage." "Yeah, but he ain't a king. He's a patrician." "Well, half his patrimony or whatever. What's his daughter like?" The assembled hunters didn't know. "He's not married," Vimes volunteered, "and he hasn't got a daughter." They turned and looked him up and down. He could see the disdain in their eyes. They probably got through dozens like him every day. "Not got a daughter," said one of them. "Wants people to kill dragons and he hasn't got a daughter?" Vimes felt, in an odd way, that he ought to support the lord of the city. "He's got a little dog that he's very fond of," he said helpfully. "Bladin' disgustin' not even having a daughter," said one of the hunters. "And what's $50,000 these days? You spend that much in nets." "That's right," said another. "People think it's a fortune, but they don't reckon on, well, it's not pensionable. There's all the medical expenses you've got to buy and maintain your own gear." "Wear and tear on virgins," nodded a small fat hunter. "Yeah, and then there's—" "What?" "My specialty is unicorns," the hunter explained with an embarrassed smile. "Oh, right." The first speaker looked like someone who had always been dying to ask the question. "I thought they were very rare these days." "You're right there. You don't see many unicorns either," said the unicorn hunter. Vimes got the impression that in his whole life, this was his only joke. "Yeah, well, times are hard," said the first speaker sharply. "Monsters are getting more uppity, too," said another. "I heard where this guy, he killed this monster in this lake, no problem, stuck its arm up over the door." "What? Por encorge las otras," said one of the listeners. "Right, and you know what? Its mum come out and complained. Its actual mum come right down to the hall next day and complained. Actually complained. That's the respect you get. That's a Beowulf reference. I cannot believe I did not know that was a Beowulf reference before. Ah! Okay, sorry. "The females are always the worst," said another hunter gloomily. "I knew this cross-eyed Gorgon once. She was a terror. Kept turning her own nose to stone." "It's our horses on the line every time," said the intellectual. "I mean, I wish I had $1 for every horse I'd had eaten out from underneath me." "Right, $50,000? He can stuff it." "Yeah, cheapskate. Let's go and have a drink." "Right." They nodded in righteous agreement and strode off towards the mended drum, except for the intellectual, who sidled uneasily back to Vimes. "What sort of dog?" he said. "What?" said Vimes. "I said, what sort of dog?" Small wire-hair terrier, I think," said Vimes. The hunter thought about this for some time. "Nah," he said eventually and hurried off after the others. "He's got an aunt in Pseudopolis, I believe," Vimes called after him. There was no response. The captain of the watch shrugged and carried on through the throng to the patrician's palace, where the patrician was having a difficult lunchtime. "Gentlemen," he snapped, "I really don't see what else there is to do." The assembled civic leaders muttered amongst themselves. "At times like this, it's traditional that a hero comes forth," said the president of the Guild of Assassins. "A dragon slayer? Where is he? That's what I want to know. Why aren't our schools turning out young people with the kind of skills society needs?" $50,000 doesn't sound like much, said the chairman of the Guild of Thieves. "It may not be to you, my dear sir, but it is all the city can afford," said the patrician firmly. "If it doesn't afford any more than that, I don't think there'll be a city for long," said the thief. "And what about trade?" said the representative of the Guild of Merchants. "People aren't going to sail here with a cargo of rail comestibles just to have it incinerated, are they?" Gentlemen, the patrician raised his hands in a conciliatory fashion. "It seems to me," he went on, taking advantage of the brief pause, "that what we have here is a strictly magical phenomenon. I would like to hear from our learned friend on this point." Someone nudged the Arch-Chancellor of Unseen University, who had nodded off. "What?" said the wizard, startled into wakefulness. "We were wondering," said the patrician loudly, "what you were intending to do about this dragon of yours." The Arch-Chancellor was old, but a lifetime of survival in the world of competitive wizardry and the Byzantine politics of Unseen University meant that he could whip up a defensive argument in a split second. You didn't remain Arch-Chancellor for long if you let that sort of ingenious remark whiz by your ear. "My dragon," he said. "It's well known that the great dragons are extinct," said the patrician brusquely, "and besides, their natural habitat was definitely rural, so it seems to me that this one must be magic." "With respect, Lord Vetinari," said the Arch-Chancellor, "it has often been claimed that dragons are extinct, but the current evidence, if I may make so bold, tends to cast a certain doubt on the theory. As to habitat, what we are seeing here is simply a change of behavior pattern, occasioned by the spread of urban areas into the countryside, which has led many hitherto rural creatures to adopt, nay, in many cases to positively embrace a more municipal mode of existence, and many of them thrive on the new opportunities thereby opened to them. For example, foxes are always knocking over my dustbins." He beamed. He managed to get all the way through it without actually needing to engage his brain. "Are you saying," said the assassin slowly, "that what we've got here is the first civic dragon?" "That's evolution for you," said the wizard happily. "Should do well, too," he added. "Plenty of nesting sites and a more than adequate food supply." Silence greeted this statement until the merchant said, "What exactly is it that they do eat?" The thief shrugged. "I seem to recall stories about virgins chained to huge rocks," he volunteered. "It'll starve round here, then," said the assassin. "We're on loam." "They used to go around ravening," said the thief. "Dunno if that's any help." "Anyway," said the leader of the merchants, "it seems to be your problem again, my lord." 5 minutes later, the patrician was striding the length of the oblong office, fuming. "They were laughing at me," said the patrician. "I could tell." "Did you suggest a working party?" said Wance. "Of course I did. It didn't do the trick this time. You know, I really am inclined to increase the reward money." "I don't think that would work, my lord. Any proficient monster slayer knows the rate for the job." "Ha! Half the kingdom," muttered the patrician. "And your daughter's hand in marriage," said Wance. "I suppose an aunt isn't acceptable," the patrician said hopefully. "Tradition demands a daughter, my lord." The patrician nodded gloomily. "Perhaps we can buy it off," he said aloud. "Are dragons intelligent?" "I believe the word traditionally is cunning, my lord," said Wance. "I understand they have a liking for gold." "Really? What do they spend it on?" "They sleep on it, my lord." "What, do you mean in a mattress?" "No, my lord, on it." The patrician turned this fact over in his mind. "Don't they find it rather knobbly?" he said. "So I would imagine, sir. I don't suppose anyone has ever asked." Can they talk?" "They're apparently good at it, my lord." "Ah, interesting." The patrician was thinking, if it can talk, it can negotiate. If it can negotiate, then I have it by the small scales, or whatever it is they have. "And they are said to be silver-tongued," said Wance. The patrician leaned back in his chair. "Only silver?" he said. There was the sound of muted voices in the passageway outside, and Vimes was ushered in. "Ah, Captain," said the patrician. "What progress?" "Sorry, my lord," said Vimes as the rain dripped off his cape. "Towards apprehending this dragon?" said the patrician firmly. "The wading birds?" said Vimes. "You know very well what I mean," said Veterinary sharply. "Investigations are in hand," said Vimes automatically. The patrician snorted. "All you have to do is find its lair," he said. "Once you have the lair, you have the dragon. That's obvious. Half the city seems to be looking for it." "If there is a lair," said Vimes. Wance looked up sharply. "Why do you say that?" "We are considering a number of possibilities," said Vimes woodenly. "If it has no lair, where does it spend its days?" said the patrician. "Inquiries are being pursued," said Vimes. "Then pursue them with alacrity, and find the lair," said the patrician sourly. "Yes, sir. Permission to leave, sir?" "Very well, but I shall expect progress by tonight. Do you understand?" Now why did I wonder if it has a lair, Vimes thought as he stepped out into the daylight in the crowded square. Because it didn't look real, that's why. If it isn't real, it doesn't need to do anything we expect. How can it walk out of an alley it didn't go into? Once you've ruled out the impossible, then whatever is left, however improbable, must be the truth. The problem lay in working out what was impossible, of course. That was the trick, all right. There was also the curious incident of the orangutan in the nighttime. Hold on. Quick tea break. Okay. So many different people are talking in this section. It's like, oh, what's an accent I haven't done yet? Oh, God. By day, the library buzzed with activity. Vimes moved through it diffidently. Strictly speaking, he could go anywhere in the city, but the university had always held that it fell under thaumaturgical law, and he felt it wouldn't be wise to make the kind of enemies where you were lucky to end up the same temperature, let alone the same shape. That's a weird sentence. He found the librarian hunched over his desk. The ape gave him an expectant look. Haven't found it yet. Sorry, said Vimes. Inquiries are continuing, but there is a little help you can give me. Ooh? Well, this is a magical library, right? I mean, these books are sort of intelligent, isn't that so? So I've been thinking, I bet if I got in here at night, they'd soon kick up a fuss, because they don't know me. But if they did know me, they'd probably not mind. So whoever took the book would have to be a wizard, wouldn't they? Or someone who works for the university, at any rate. The librarian glanced from side to side, then grasped Vimes' hand and led him into the seclusion of a couple bookshelves. Only then did he nod his head. Someone they know? A shrug and then another nod. That's why you told us, isn't it? Ook. And not the university council? Ook. Any idea who it is? The librarian shrugged, a decidedly expressive gesture for a body that was basically a sack between a pair of shoulder blades. Well, it's something. Let me know if any other strange things happen, won't you? Vimes looked up at the banks of shelves. Stranger than usual, I mean. Ook. Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet a citizen who regards it as their duty to assist the watch. The librarian gave him a banana. Vimes felt curiously elated as he stepped out into the city's throbbing streets again. He was definitely detecting things. They were little bits of things like a jigsaw. No one of them made any real sense, but they all hinted at a bigger picture. All he needed to do was find a corner or a bit of an edge. He was pretty certain it wasn't a wizard, whatever the librarian might think. Not a proper paid-up wizard. This sort of thing wasn't really their style. And there was, of course, this business about the lair. The most sensible course would be to wait and see if the dragon turned up tonight, and try and see where. That meant a high place. Was there some way of detecting dragons themselves? He'd had a look at Cut-Me-On-Throat Dibbler's dragon detectors, which consisted solely of a piece of wood on a metal stick. When the stick was burned through, you'd found your dragon. Like a lot of Cut-Me-On-Throat's devices, it was completely efficient in its own special way, while at the same time being totally useless. There had to be a better way of finding the thing than waiting until your fingers were burned off. The setting sun spread out on the horizon like a lightly poached egg. The rooftops of Ankh-Morpork sprouted a fine array of gargoyles even in normal times, but now they were alive with as ghastly an array of faces as ever were seen outside a woodcut about the evils of gin drinking among the non-woodcut buying classes. Many of the faces were attached to bodies, holding a fearsome array of homely weapons that had been handed down from generation to generation for centuries, often with some force. From his perch on the roof of the watch house, Vimes could see the wizards lining the rooftops of the university and the gangs of opportunist horde researchers waiting in the streets, shovels at the ready. If the dragon really did have a bed somewhere in the city, then it would be sleeping on the floor tomorrow. From somewhere below came the cry of Cut-Me-On-Throat Dibbler, or one of his colleagues, selling hot sausages. Vimes felt a sudden surge of civic pride. There had to be something right about a citizenry There had to be something right about a citizenry which, when faced with catastrophe, thought about selling sausages to the participants. The city waited. A few stars came out. Colin, Nobby, and Carrot were also on the roof. Colin was sulking because Vimes had forbidden him to use his bow and arrow. These weren't encouraged in the city, since the heft and throw of a longbow's arrow could send it through an innocent bystander 100 yards away rather than the innocent bystander at whom it was aimed. That's right, said Carrot. The Projectile Weapons Civic Safety Act, 1634. Don't you keep on quoting all that sort of stuff, snapped Colin. We don't have any of them laws anymore. That's all old stuff. It's all what's name now? Pragmatic. Law or no law, said Vimes, I say put it away. But Captain, I was a dab hand at this. But Captain, I was a dab hand at this, protested Colin. Anyway, he added peevishly, a lot of other people have got 'em. That was true enough. Neighboring rooftops bristled like hedgehogs. If the wretched thing turned up, it was going to think it was flying through solid wood with slots in it. You could almost feel sorry for it. I said, put it away, said Vimes. I'm not having my guards shooting citizens, so put it away. That's very true, said Carrot. We're here to protect and to serve, aren't we, Captain? Vimes gave him a sidelong look. He said, yes, that's right. On the roof of her house on the hill, Lady Ramkin adjusted a rather inadequate folding chair on the roof, arranged the telescope, coffee flask, and sandwiches on the parapet in front of her, and settled down to wait. She had a notebook on her knee. Half an hour went by. Hails of arrows greeted a passing cloud, several unfortunate bats, and the rising moon. "Bugger this for a game of soldiers," said Nobby eventually. "It's been scared off." Sergeant Colin lowered his pike. "Looks like it," he conceded. "And it's getting chilly up here," said Carrot. He politely nudged Captain Vimes, who was slumped against the chimney, staring moodily into space. "Maybe we ought to be getting down, sir?" he said. "Lots of people are." Said Vimes without moving his head. "Could be coming on to rain, too," said Carrot. Vimes said nothing. For some minutes he had been watching the Tower of Art, which was the center of the Unseen University and reputedly the oldest building in the city. It was certainly the tallest. Time, weather, and indifferent repairs had given it a gnarled appearance, like a tree that had seen too many thunderstorms. He was trying to remember its shape. As is the case with many things that are totally familiar, he hadn't really looked at it for years. Now he was trying to convince himself that the forest of little turrets and crenellations at its top looked just the same tonight as they had done yesterday. It was giving him some difficulty. Without taking his eyes off it, he grabbed Sergeant Colin's shoulder and gently pointed him in the right direction. He said, "Can you see anything odd about the top of the tower?" Colin stared up for a while and then laughed nervously. "Well, it looks like there's a dragon sitting on it, doesn't it?" "Yep, that's what I thought. Only when you sort of look properly, you can see it's just made up out of shadows and clumps of ivy and that. I mean, if you half close one eye, it looks like two old women in a wheelbarrow." Vimes tried this. "Nope," he said. "It still looks like a dragon. A huge one, sort of hunched up and looking down. Look, you can see its wings folded up." "Beg pardon, sir, that's just a broken turret giving the effect." They watched it for a while. Then Vimes said, "Tell me, Sergeant," I asked in a spirit of pure inquiry, "what do you think is causing the effect of a pair of huge wings unfurling?" Colin swallowed. "I think that's caused by a pair of huge wings, sir," he said. "Spot on, Sergeant." The dragon dropped. It wasn't a swoop, it simply kicked away from the top of the tower and half fell, half flew straight downwards, disappearing from view behind the university buildings. Vimes caught himself listening for the thump. And then the dragon was in view again, moving like an arrow, moving like a shooting star, moving like something that has somehow turned a 32 feet per second plummet into an unstoppable upward swoop. It glided over the rooftops at little more than head height, all the more horrible because of the sound. It was as though the air was slowly and carefully being torn in half. The watch threw themselves flat. Vimes caught a glimpse of huge, vaguely horse-like features before it slid past. "Sodding arseholes," said Nobby from somewhere in the guttering. Vimes redoubled his grip on the chimney and pulled himself upright. "You are in uniform, Corporal Nobbs," he said, his voice hardly shaking at all. "Sorry, Captain. Sodding arseholes, sir." "Where's Sergeant Colin?" Down here, sir. Holding on to this drain pipe, sir." "Oh, for goodness sake, help him up, Carrot." "Gosh," said Carrot, "look at it go." You could tell the position of the dragon by the rattle of arrows across the city and by the screams and gurgles of all those hit by the misses and ricochets. "He hasn't even flapped his wings yet," shouted Carrot, trying to stand on the chimney pot. "Look at him go!" "It shouldn't be that big," Vimes told himself, watching the huge shape wheel over the river. "It's as long as a street." There was a puff of flame above the docks, and for a moment the creature passed in front of the moon. Then it flapped its wings, once, with a sound like the damp hides of a pedigree herd being slapped across a cliff. It turned in a tight circle, pounded the air a few times to build up speed, and came back. When it passed over the watch house, it coughed a column of spitting white fire. Tiles under it didn't just melt, they erupted in red-hot droplets. The chimney stack exploded and rained bricks across the street. Vast wings hammered at the air as the creature hovered over the burning building, fire spearing down on what rapidly became a glowing heap. Then, when all that was left was a spreading puddle of melted rock with interesting streaks and bubbles in it, the dragon raised itself with a contemptuous flick of its wings and soared away and upward over the city. Lady Ramkin lowered her telescope and shook her head slowly. "That's not right," she whispered. "That's not right at all. Shouldn't be able to do anything like that." She raised the lens again and squinted, trying to see what was on fire. Down below, in their long kennels, the little dragons howled. Traditionally, upon waking up from blissfully uneventful insensibility, you ask, "Where am I?" It's probably part of the racial consciousness or something. Vimes said it. Tradition allows a choice of second lines. A key point in the selection process is an audit to see that the body still has all the bits it remembers having yesterday. Vimes checked. Then comes the tantalizing bit. Now that the snowball of consciousness is starting to roll, is it going to find that it's waking up inside a body lying in a gutter with something multiple With something multiple, the noun doesn't matter. After an adjective like multiple, nothing good ever follows multiple. Or is it going to be a case of crisp sheets, a soothing hand, and a businesslike figure in white, pulling open the curtains on a bright new day? Is it all over, with nothing worse to look forward to now than weak tea, nourishing gruel, short strengthening walks in the garden, and possibly a brief platonic love affair with a ministering angel? Or was this all just a moment's blackout, and some looming bastard is now about to get down to real business with the thick end of a pickaxe helve? Are there, the consciousness wants to know, going to be grapes? At this point, some outside stimulus is helpful. It's going to be all right is favorite, whereas did anyone get his number is definitely a bad sign. Either, however, is better than you two hold his hands behind his back. In fact, someone said, "You were nearly a goner there, Captain." The pain sensations, which had taken advantage of Vimes' unconscious state to buck off for a metaphorical quick cigarette, rushed back. Vimes said, "Ah!" Then he opened his eyes. There was a ceiling. This ruled out one particular range of unpleasant options and was very welcome. His blurred vision also revealed Corporal Nobbs, which was less so. Corporal Nobbs proved nothing. You could be dead and see something like Corporal Nobbs. Ankh-Morpork did not have many hospitals. All the guilds maintained their own sanitariums, and there were a few public ones run by the odder religious organizations like the Balancing Monks, but by and large medical assistance was non-existent and people had to die inefficiently, without the aid of doctors. It was generally thought that the existence of cures encouraged slackness and was in any case probably against nature's way. "Have I already said where am I?" said Vimes faintly. "Yes." "Did I get an answer?" "Dunno where this place is, Captain. Belongs to some posh bint. She said to bring you up here." Even though Vimes' mind appeared to be full of pink treacle, he nevertheless grabbed two clues and wrestled them together. The combination of rich and up here meant something. So did the strange chemical smell in the room, which even overpowered Nobby's more everyday odors. "We're not talking about Lady Ramkin, are we?" he said cautiously. "You got that right. Great big biddy. Mad for dragons." Nobby's rodent face broke into the most horribly knowing grin Vimes had ever seen. "You're in a bed," he said. Vimes peered around him, feeling the first overtures of a vague panic, because now that he could halfway focus, he could see a certain lack of bachelor sockness about the place. There was a faint hint of talcum powder. "Bit of a boudoir," said Nobby with the air of a connoisseur. Hang on a minute," said Vimes. "There was this dragon. It was right over us." The memory rose up and hit him like a zombie with a grudge. "You all right, Captain?" The talons, outspread, wide as a man's reach, the boom and thump of the wings, bigger than sails, the stink of chemicals, the gods alone knew what sort. It had been so close he could see the tiny scales on its legs and the red gleam in its eyes. They were more than just reptile eyes. They were eyes you could drown in. And the breath, so hot it wasn't like fire at all, but something almost solid, not burning things, but smashing them apart. On the other hand, he was here and alive. His left side felt as though it had been hit with an iron bar, but he was quite definitely alive. "What happened?" he said. "It was young Carrot," said Nobby. "He grabbed you and the sergeant and jumped off the roof just before it got us." "My side hurts. It must have got me," said Vimes. "No, I reckon that was where you hit the privy roof," said Nobby. And then you rolled off and hit the water butt." "What about Colin? Is he hurt?" "Not hurt. Not exactly hurt. He landed more sort of softly. Him being so heavy, he went through the roof. Talk about a short shower of..." "And then what happened?" "Well, we sort of made you comfy, and then everyone went blundering around and shouting for the sergeant until they found out where he was, of course. Then they just stood where they were and shouted. And then this woman comes running up yelling," said Nobby. "This is Lady Ramkin you're referring to?" said Vimes coldly. His ribs were aching really magnificently now. "Yeah, big fat party," said Nobby, unmoved. "Course, she can't half-boss people about. Oh, the poor dear man, you must bring him up to my house this instant." So we did. Best place, too. Everyone's running around down the city like chickens with their heads cut off. "How much damage did it do?" "Well, after you were out of it, the wizards hit it with fireballs. Didn't like that at all. Just seemed to make it stronger and angrier. Took out the university's entire Widdershins wing. And, well, that's about it, really. Flamed a few more things, and then it must have flown away in all the smoke." "No one saw where it went?" "If they did, they ain't saying." Nobby sat back and leered. "Disgusting, really, her living in a room like this. She's got pots of money, Sarge says. She's got no coal living in ordinary rooms. What's the good of not wanting to be poor if the rich are allowed to go round living in ordinary rooms? Should be marble," he sniffed. "Anyway, she said I was to fetch her when you woke up. She's feeding the dragons now. Odd little buggers, ain't they? It's amazing she's allowed to keep them." "Oh, excuse me." "What do you mean?" "You know, tarred with the same brush and that." When Nobby had shambled out, Vimes took another look around the room. It did indeed lack the gold leaf and marble that Nobby felt was compulsory for people of a high station in life. All the furniture was old, and the pictures on the wall, though doubtless valuable, looked the sort of pictures that are hung on bedroom walls because people can't think of anywhere else to put them. There were a few amateurish watercolors of dragons. All in all, it had the look about it of a room that is only ever occupied by one person and has been absent-mindedly molded around them over the years, like a suit of clothes with a ceiling. It was clearly the room of a woman, but one who had cheerfully and without any silly moping been getting on with her life while all that soppy romance stuff had been happening to other people somewhere else, and been jolly grateful that she had her health. Such clothing as was visible had been chosen for sensible, hard-wearing qualities, possibly by a previous generation by the look of it, rather than its use as light artillery in the war between the sexes. There were bottles and jars neatly arranged on the dressing table, but a certain severity of line suggested that their labels would say things like "rub on nightly" rather than "just a dab behind the ears." You could imagine that the occupant of this room had slept in it all her life and had been called "my little girl" by her father until she was 40. There was a big, sensible blue dressing gown hanging behind the door. Vimes knew, without even looking, that it would have a rabbit on the pocket. In short, it was the room of a woman who had never expected that a man would ever see the inside of it. The bedside table was piled high with papers. Feeling guilty, but doing it anyway, Vimes squinted at them. Dragons was the theme. There were letters from the Cavern Club Exhibitions Committee and the Friendly Flamethrowers League. There were pamphlets and appeals from the Sunshine Sanctuary for Sick Dragons. Poor little Vinny's fires were nearly damped after 5 years, cruel use as a paint stripper, but now, and there were requests for donations and talks and things that added up to a heart big enough for the whole world, or at least the part of it that had wings and breathed fire. If you let your mind dwell on rooms like this, you could end up being oddly sad and full of a strange, diffuse compassion, which would lead you to believe that it might be a good idea to wipe out the whole human race and start again with amoebas. Besides the drift of paperwork was a book. Vimes twisted painfully and looked at the spine. It said, Diseases of the Dragon by Sybil Deirdre Ogivana Ramkin. He turned the stiff pages in horrified fascination. They opened into another world, a world of quite stupefying problems. Slab throat, the black tups, dry lung, storage, staggers, heaves, weeps, stones. It was amazing, he decided after reading a few pages, that a swamp dragon ever survived to see a second sunrise. Even walking across a room must be reckoned a biological triumph. The painstakingly drawn illustrations he looked away from hurriedly. You could only take so much innards. There was a knock at the door. "I say, are you decent?" Lady Ramkin boomed cheerfully. I've brought you something jolly nourishing." Somehow Vimes imagined it would be soup. Instead, it was a plate stacked high with bacon, fried potatoes, and eggs. He could hear his arteries panic just by looking at it. "I've made a bread pudding, too," said Lady Ramkin slightly sheepishly. "I don't normally cook much, just for myself. You know how it is, catering for one." Vimes thought about the meals at his lodgings. Somehow the meat was always gray, with mysterious tubes in it. He began, not used to addressing ladies from a recumbent position in their own beds. "Corporal Nobbs tells me—" "And what a colorful little man Nobby is," said Lady Ramkin. Vimes wasn't certain he could cope with this. "Colorful?" he said weakly. "A real character. We've been getting along famously." "You have? Oh, yes. What a great fund of anecdotes he has." "Oh, yeah, he's got that all right." It always amazed Vimes how Nobby got along with practically everyone. It must, he decided, have something to do with the common denominator. In the entire world of mathematics, there could be no denominator as common as Nobby. He said, and then found he couldn't leave this strange new byway. "You don't find his language a bit, ripe?" "Salty," corrected Lady Ramkin cheerfully. "You should have heard my father when he was annoyed. Anyway, we found we've got quite a lot in common. It's an amazing coincidence, but my grandfather once had his grandfather whipped for malicious lingering." That must make them practically family, Vimes thought. Another stab of pain from his stricken side made him wince. "You've got some very bad bruising and probably a cracked rib or two," she said. "If you'll roll over, I'll put some more of this on." Lady Ramkin flourished a jar of yellow ointment. Panic crossed Vimes's face. Instinctively, he raised the sheets up around his neck. "Don't play silly buggers, man," she said. "I shan't see anything I haven't seen before. One backside is pretty much like another. It's just that the ones I see generally have tails on. Now roll over and up with the nightshirt. It belonged to my grandfather, you know." There was no resisting that tone of voice. Vimes thought about demanding that Nobby be brought in as a chaperone, and then decided that would be even worse. The cream burned like ice. "What is it?" "All kinds of stuff. It'll reduce the bruising and promote the growth of healthy scale." "What?" "Sorry, probably not scale on you. Oh, don't look so worried. I'm almost positive about that. Okay, all done." She gave him a slap on the rump. "Madam, I am captain of the night watch," said Vimes, knowing it was a bloody daft thing to say even as he said it. "Half naked in a lady's bed, too," said Lady Ramkin, unmoved. "Now sit up and eat your tea. We've got to get you good and strong." Vimes's eyes filled with panic. "Why?" he said. Lady Ramkin reached into the pocket of her grubby jacket. "I made some notes last night," she said, "about the dragon." "Oh, the dragon!" Vimes relaxed a bit. Right now, the dragon seemed a much safer prospect. "And I did a bit of working out, too. I'll tell you this, it's a very odd beast. It shouldn't be able to get airborne." "You're right there. If it's built like swamp dragons, it should weigh about 20 tons. 20 tons! It's impossible. It's all down to weight and wingspan ratios, you see." I saw it drop off the tower like a swallow. I know. It should have torn its wings off and left a bloody great hole in the ground, said Lady Ramkin firmly. You can't muck about with aerodynamics. You can't just scale up from small to big and leave it at that, you see. It's all a matter of muscle power and lifting surfaces. I knew there was something wrong, said Vimes, brightening up. And the flame, too. Nothing goes around with that kind of heat inside it. How do swamp dragons manage it? Oh, that's just chemicals, said Lady Ramkin dismissively. They just distill something flammable from whatever they've eaten and ignite the flame just as it comes out the ducts. They never actually have fire inside them unless they get a case of blowback. What happens then? You're scraping dragon off the scenery, said Lady Ramkin cheerfully. I'm afraid they're not very well-designed creatures, dragons. Vimes listened. They would never have survived at all except that their home swamps were isolated and short of predators. Not that a dragon made good eating anyway. Once you've taken away the leathery skin and the enormous flight muscles, what was left must have been like biting into a badly run chemical factory. No wonder dragons were always ill. They relied on permanent stomach trouble for supplies of fuel. Most of their brain power was taken up with controlling the complexities of their digestion, which could distill flame-producing fuels from the most unlikely ingredients. They could even rearrange their internal plumbing overnight to deal with difficult processes. They lived on a chemical knife edge the whole time. One misplaced hiccup and they were geography. And when it came to choosing nesting sites, the females had all the common sense and mothering instinct of a brick. Vimes wondered why people had been so worried about dragons in the olden days. If there was one in a cave near you, all you had to do was wait until it self-ignited, blew itself up, or died of acute indigestion. You've really studied them, haven't you? He said. Well, someone ought to. But what about the big ones? Golly, yes. They're a great mystery, you know, she said, her expression becoming extremely serious. Yes, you said. There are legends, you know. It seems as though one species of dragon started to get bigger and bigger and then just vanished. Died out, you mean? No, they turned up sometimes, from somewhere, full of vim and vigor, and then one day they stopped coming at all. She gave Vimes a triumphant look. I think they found somewhere where they could really be. Really be what? Dragons. Where they could really fulfill their potential. Some other dimension or something, where the gravity isn't so strong or something. I thought when I saw it, said Vimes, I thought, you can't have something that flies and has scales like that. They looked at each other. We've got to find it in its lair, said Lady Ramkin. No bloody flying newt sets fire to my city, said Vimes. Just think of the contributions to dragon lore, said Lady Ramkin. Listen, if anyone ever sets fire to this city, it's going to be me. It's an amazing opportunity. There's so many questions. You're right there. A phrase of Carrot's crossed Vimes's mind. It can help us with our inquiries, he suggested. But in the morning, said Lady Ramkin firmly. Vimes's look of bitter determination faded. I shall sleep downstairs in the kitchen, said Lady Ramkin cheerfully. I usually have a camp bed made up down there when it's egg-laying time. Some of the females always need assistance. Don't you worry about me. You're being very helpful, Vimes muttered. I've sent Nobby down to the city to help the others set up your headquarters, said Lady Ramkin. Vimes had completely forgotten the watch house. It must have been badly damaged, he ventured. Totally destroyed, said Lady Ramkin. Just a patch of melted rock. So I'm letting you have a place in Pseudopolis Yard. Sorry? Oh, my father has property all over the city, she said. Quite useless to me, really. So I told my agent to give Sergeant Colin the keys to the old house in Pseudopolis Yard. It'll do it good to be aired. But that area, there's real cobbles on the street. The rent alone, Lord Vetinari, well, don't you worry about it, she said, giving him a friendly pat. No, you really ought to get some sleep. Vimes lay in bed, his mind racing. Pseudopolis Yard was on the Onk side of the river, in quite a high-rent district. The sight of Nobby or Sergeant Colin walking down the street in daylight would probably have the same effect on the area as the opening of a plague hospital. He dozed, gliding in and out of a sleep where giant dragons pursued him, waving jars of ointment, and awoke to the sound of a mob. Lady Ramkin, drawing herself up haughtily, was not a sight to forget, although you could try. It was like watching continental drift in reverse as various subcontinents and islands pulled themselves together to form one massive, angry proto-woman. The broken door of the dragon house swung on its hinges. The inmates, already as highly strung as a harp on amphetamines, were going mad. Little gouts of flame burst against the metal plates as they stampeded back and forth in their pens. What, she said, is the meaning of this? If a Ramkin had ever been given to introspection, she'd have admitted that it wasn't a very original line, but it was handy. It did the job. The reasons that cliches become cliches is that they are the hammers and screwdrivers in the toolbox of communication. The mob filled the broken doorway. Some of it was waving various sharp implements with the up-and-down motion proper to rioters. Well, said the leader, it's the dragon, ain't it? There was a chorus of muttered agreement. What about it? Said Lady Ramkin. Well, it's been burned in the city. They don't fly far. You got dragons here? Could be one of them, couldn't it? Yeah, that's right. QED. So what we're going to do is, we're going to put 'em down. That's right. Yeah, pro bono publico. Lady Ramkin's bosom rose and fell like an empire. She reached out and grabbed the dunging fork from its hook on the wall. "One step nearer, I warn you, and you'll be sorry," she said. The leader looked beyond her to the frantic dragons. "Yeah," he said nastily. "And what'll you do, eh?" Her mouth opened and shut once or twice. "I shall summon the watch," she said at last. The threat did not have the effect she had expected. Lady Ramkin had never paid attention to those bits of the city that didn't have scales on it. "Well, that's too bad," said the leader. "That's really worrying, you know what? Makes me go all weak in the knees, that does." He extracted a lengthy cleaver from his belt. "And now you just stand aside, lady, because—" A streak of green fire blasted out the back of the shed, passed a foot over the heads of the mob, and burned a charred rosette in the woodwork over the door. Then came a voice that was a honeyed purr of sheer, deadly menace. "This is Lord Mountjoy Quickfang Winterforth IV, the hottest dragon in the city. It could burn your head clean off." Captain Vimes limped forward from the shadows. A small and extremely frightened golden dragon was clamped firmly under one arm. His other hand held it by the tail. The rioters watched it, hypnotized. "Now I know what you're thinking," Vimes went on softly. "You're wondering, after all this excitement, has it got enough flame left? And you know, I ain't so sure myself." He leaned forward, sighting between the dragon's ears, and his voice buzzed like a knife blade. "What you've got to ask yourself is, am I feeling lucky?" They swayed backwards as he advanced. "Well," he said, "are you feeling lucky?" For a few moments, the only sound was Lord Mountjoy Quickfang Winterforth IV's stomach rumbling ominously as fuel sloshed into his flame chambers. "Now look," said the leader, his eyes fixed hypnotically on the dragon's head. "There's no call for anything like that." "In fact, he might just decide to flare off all by himself," said Vimes. "They have to do it to stop the gas building up. It builds up when they get nervous. And you know, I reckon you've made them all pretty nervous now." The leader had made what he hoped was a vaguely conciliatory gesture, but unfortunately he did it with the hand that was still holding a knife. "Drop it," said Vimes, "or your history." The knife clanged on the flagstones. There was a scuffle at the back of the crowd as a number of people, metaphorically speaking, were a long way away and knew nothing about it. "But before the rest of you good citizens disperse quietly and go about your business," said Vimes meaningly, "I suggest you look hard at these dragons. Do any of them look 60 feet long? Would you say they've got an 80-foot wingspan? How hot do they flame, would you say?" "Dunno," said the leader. Vimes raised the dragon's head slightly. The leader rolled his eyes. "Dunno, sir," he corrected. "Do you want to find out?" The leader shook his head, but he did manage to find his voice. "Who are you, anyway?" Vimes drew himself up. "Captain Vimes, City Watch," he said. This met with almost complete silence. The exception was the cheerful voice somewhere in the back of the crowd, which said, "Night shift, is it?" Vimes looked down at his nightshirt. In his hurry to get off his sickbed, he'd shuffled hastily into a pair of Lady Ramkin's slippers. For the first time, he saw they had pink pom-poms on them. And it was at this moment that Lord Mountjoy Quickfang Winterforth IV chose to belch. It wasn't another stab of roaring fire. It was just a near-invisible ball of damp flame which rolled over the mob and singed a few eyebrows. But it definitely made an impression. Vimes rallied magnificently. They couldn't have noticed his brief moment of sheer horror. "That one was just to get your attention," he said, poker-faced. "The next one will be a little lower." Said the leader. "Right you are, no problem. We were just going anyway. No big dragons here right enough. Sorry you've been troubled." "Oh no," said Lady Ramkin triumphantly. "You don't get away that easily." She reached up onto a shelf and produced a tin box. It had a slot in the lid. It rattled. On the side was the legend, "The Sunshine Sanctuary for Sick Dragons." The initial whip round produced $4.31. After Captain Vimes gestured pointedly with the dragon, a further $25.16 were miraculously forthcoming. Then the mob fled. "We made a profit on the day anyway," said Vimes when they were alone again. "That was jolly brave of you." "Let's just hope it doesn't catch on," said Vimes, gingerly putting the exhausted dragon back in its pen. He felt quite lightheaded. Once again, he was aware of eyes staring fixedly at him. He glanced sideways into the long, pointed face of good boy Bindle Featherstone, rearing up in a pose best described as the last puppy in the shop. To his astonishment, he found himself reaching over and scratching it behind its ears, or at least behind the two spiky things at the side of his head, which were presumably its ears. It responded with a strange noise that sounded like a complicated blockage in a brewery. He took his hand away hurriedly. "It's all right," said Lady Ramkin. "That's his stomach's rumbling. It means he likes you." To his amazement, Vimes found that he was rather pleased about this. As far as he could recall, nothing in his life before had thought him worth a burp. "I thought you were, going to get rid of him," he said. I suppose I shall have to, she said. You know how it is, though. They look up at you with those big, soulful eyes. There was a brief, mutual awkward silence. How would it be if you don't think you might like... They stopped. It'd be the least I could do, said Lady Ramkin. But you're already giving us the new headquarters and everything. That was simply my duty as a good citizen, said Lady Ramkin. Please accept Good Boy as a friend. Vimes felt that he was being inched out over a very deep chasm on a very thin plank. I don't even know what they eat, he said. They're omnivores, actually, she said. They eat everything except metal and igneous rocks. You can't be finicky, you see, when you evolve in a swamp. But doesn't he need to be taken on walks or flights or whatever? He seems to sleep most of the time. She scratched the ugly thing on top of its scaly head. He's the most relaxed dragon I've ever bred, I must say. What about the, he indicated the dunging fork. Well, it's mainly gas. Just keep him somewhere well ventilated. You haven't got any valuable carpets, have you? It's best not to let them lick your face, but they can be trained to control their flame. They're very helpful for lighting fires. Good Boy Bendel Featherstone curled up amidst a barrage of plumbing noises. They've got 8 stomachs, Vimes remembered. The drawings in the book had been very detailed, and there's lots of other stuff like fractional distillation tubes and mad alchemy sets in there. No swamp dragon could ever terrorize a kingdom except by accident. Vimes wondered how many had been killed by enterprising heroes. It was terribly cruel to do something like that to creatures whose only crime was to blow themselves absent-mindedly to pieces in midair, which was not something any individual dragon made a habit of. It made him quite angry to think about it. A race of whittles, that's what dragons were. Born to lose, live fast, die wide. Omnivores or not, what they must really live on was their nerves, flapping apologetically through the world in mortal fear of their own digestive systems. The family would be just getting over father's explosion, and some twerp in a suit of armor would come plodding into the swamp to stick a sword into a bag of guts that was only one step away from self-destruction in any case. It'd be interesting to see how the great dragon slayers of the past stood up to the big dragon. Armor? Best not to wear it. It'll all be the same in any case, and at least your ashes wouldn't come prepackaged in their own foil. He stared and stared at the malformed little thing, and the idea that had been knocking for attention for the last few minutes finally gained entrance. Everyone in Ankh-Morpork wanted to find the dragon's lair, at least wanted to find it empty. Bits of wood on a stick wouldn't do it, he was certain. But as they said a thief... Footnote. The phrase, set a thief to catch a thief, had by this time, after strong representations from the Thieves' Guild, replaced a much older and quintessentially Ankh-Morporkian proverb, which was set a deep hole with spring-loaded sides, tripwires, whirling knife blades driven by water power, broken glass, and scorpions to catch a thief. He said, could one dragon sniff out another? I mean, follow a scent? Whew! Hello. Quick break. I see there's 1,500 of you now. I'm glad you're all having a good time. Okay. Whew, sorry. Quick tea break. There's a lot, and I don't normally do readings in, really long sessions like this. Okay. Dearest Mother, wrote Carrot, talk about a turn-up for the books. Last night the dragon burned up our headquarters, and lo and behold, we have been given a better one. It is in a place called Pseudopolis Yard, opposite the Opera House. Sergeant Colin said we have gone up in the world and has told Nobby not to try to sell the furnishings. Going up in the world is a metaphor which I am learning about. It is like lying, but more decorative. There are proper carpets to spit on. Twice today, groups of people have tried to search the cellars here for the dragon. It is amazing, and digging up people's privies and poking into attics, it is like a fever. One thing is, people haven't got time for much else, and Sergeant Colin says, when you go out on your rounds and shout 12 of the clock and all's well while a dragon is melting the street, you feel like a bit of a Burke. I have moved out of Mrs. Palm's because there are dozens of bedrooms here. It is sad, and they made me a cake, but I think it is for the best, although Mrs. Palm's never charged me rent, which was very nice of her considering she is a widow with so many fine daughters to bring up, plus dowries, etc. Also, I have made friends with this ape who keeps coming round to see if we have found his book. Nobby says it is a flea-ridden moron because it won 18D off him playing Cripple Mr. Onion, which is a game of chance with cards which I do not play. I have told Nobby about the Gambling Regulations Acts, and he said, piss off, which I think is in violation of the Decency Ordinances of 1389, but I have decided to use my discretion. Captain Vimes is ill and is being looked after by a lady. Nobby says it is well known she is mental, but Sergeant Colin says it's just because of living in a big house with a lot of dragons, but she is worth a fortune, and well done to the Capt for getting his feet under the table. I do not see what the furniture has to do with it. This morning I went for a walk with Reet, and she showed her many interesting examples of the ironwork to be found in the city. She said it was very interesting. She said I was quite different to anyone she's ever met. Your loving son, Carrot. X. P.S. I hope Minty is keeping well. He folded the paper carefully and shoved it into the envelope. Sun's going down, said Sergeant Colin. Carrot looked up from his sealing wax. That means it will be night soon, Colin went on, accurately. Yes, Sergeant. Colin ran a finger round his collar. His skin was impressively pink, the result of a morning's scrubbing, but people were still staying at a respectful distance. Some people are born to command, some people achieve command, and others have command thrust upon them, and the sergeant was now included in this category and wasn't very happy about it. Any minute now, he knew, he was going to have to say that it was time they went out on patrol. He didn't want to go out on patrol. He wanted to find a nice sub-basement somewhere. But noblesse oblige, and by the way, that's spelled noblesse oblige. If he was in charge, he had to do it. It wasn't the loneliness of command that was bothering him. It was the being fried alive of command that was giving him problems. He was also pretty sure that unless they came up with something about this dragon very soon, then the patrician was going to be unhappy. And when the patrician was unhappy, he became very democratic. He found intricate and painful ways of spreading that unhappiness as far as possible. Responsibility, the sergeant thought, was a terrible thing. So was being horribly tortured. As far as he could see, the two facts were rapidly heading towards one another. And thus he was terribly relieved when a small coach pulled up outside the yard. It was very old and battered. There was a faded coat of arms on the door. Painted on the back, and rather newer, was the little message, "Winnie if you love dragons." Out of it, wincing as he got down, stepped Captain Vimes. Following him was the woman known to the sergeant as Mad Sybil Ramkin. And finally, hopping down obediently on the end of the lead, was a small... The sergeant was too nervous to take account of actual size. "Well, I'll be Morgador! They've only gone and caught it!" Nobby looked up from the table in the corner where he was continually failing to learn that it is almost impossible to play a game of skill and bluff against opponents who smiles all the time. The librarian took advantage of the diversion to help himself to a couple of cards off the bottom of the pack. "Don't be daft, that's just a swamp dragon," said Nobby. "She's all right, is Lady Sybil. A real lady." The other two guards turned and stared at him. This was Nobby talking. "You two can bloody well stop that," he said. "Why shouldn't I know a lady when I sees one? She gives me a cup of tea and a cup, finished paper, and a silver spoon in it," he said, speaking as one who had peeped over the plateau of social distinction. "And I'll give it back to her so you can all stop looking at me like that." "What is it you actually do on your evenings off?" said Colin. "No business of yourn." "Did you really give the spoon back?" said Carrot. "Yes, I bloody well did," said Nobby hotly. "Attention, lads," said the sergeant, flooded with relief. The other two entered the room. Vimes gave his men his usual look of resigned dismay. "My squad," he mumbled. "Fine body of men," said Lady Ramkin. "The good old rank and file, eh?" "Well, the rank, anyway," said Vimes. Lady Ramkin beamed encouragingly. This led to a strange shuffling among the men. Sergeant Colin, by dint of some effort, managed to make his chest stick out more than his stomach. Carrot straightened up from his habitual stoop. Nobby vibrated with soldierly bearing, hands thrust straight down by his sides, thumbs pointing sharply forward, pigeon chest inflated so much that his feet were in danger of leaving the ground. "I always think we can all sleep safer in my bed knowing that these brave men are watching over us," said Lady Ramkin, walking sedately along the rank like a treasure galleon running ahead of a mild breeze. "And who is this?" It is difficult for an orangutan to stand to attention. Its body can master the general idea, but its skin can't. The librarian was doing his best, however, standing in a sort of respectful heap at the end of the line and maintaining the kind of complex salute you can only achieve with a 4-foot arm. "He's plainclothes, ma'am," said Nobby smartly. "Special ape services." Very enterprising indeed," said Lady Ramkin. "How long have you been an ape, my man?" "Ook! Well done." She turned to Vimes, who was definitely looking incredulous. "A credit to you," she said. "A fine body of men." "Ook! Anthropoids," corrected Lady Ramkin, with barely a break in the flow. For a moment, the rank felt as though they had just returned from single-handedly conquering a distant province. They felt, in fact, tremendously bucked up, which was how Lady Ramkin would almost certainly have put it, and which was definitely several letters of the alphabet away from how they normally felt. Even the librarian felt favored, and for once had let the phrase, "my men," pass without comment. A trickling noise and a strong chemical smell prompted them to turn around. Good boy Bindle Featherstone was squatting with an air of sheepish innocence alongside what was not so much a stain on the carpet as a hole in the floor. A few wisps of smoke were curling up from the edges. Lady Ramkin sighed. "Don't you worry, ma'am," volunteered Nobby cheerfully. "Soon have that cleaned up." "I'm afraid they're often like that when they're excited," she said. "Fine specimen you got there, ma'am," Nobby went on, reveling in the newfound experience of social intercourse. "Oh, it's not mine," she said. "It belongs to the captain now. Or all of you, perhaps. A sort of mascot. His name is Good Boy Bindle Featherstone." Good boy Bindle Featherstone bore up stoically under the weight of the name and sniffed a table leg. "He looks more like my brother Errol," said Nobby, playing the cheeky, chirpy, lovable city sparrow card for all it was worth. "Got the same pointed nose, excuse me for saying so, my lady." Vimes looked at the creature, which was investigating its new environment, and knew that it was now, irrevocably, an Errol. The little dragon took an experimental bite out of the table, chewed it for a few seconds, spat it out, curled up, and went to sleep. "He ain't going to set fire to anything, is he?" said the sergeant anxiously. "I don't think so. He doesn't seem to have worked out what his flame ducts are for yet," said Lady Ramkin. "You can't teach him anything about relaxing, though," said Vimes. "Anyway, men." "Ook, I wasn't talking to you, sir. What's this doing here?" Said Sergeant Colin hurriedly. With you being away and all, and us likely to be short-handed, Carrot here says it's all according to the law and that. I swore him in, sir. The ape, sir." "Swore him in what, Sergeant?" said Vimes. "As special constable, sir," said Colin, blushing. "You know, sir, sort of citizen's watch." Vimes threw up his hands. "Special? Bloody unique." The librarian gave Vimes a big smile. "Just temporarily, sir, for the duration," said Colin pleadingly. "We could do with the help, sir, and he's the only one who seems to like us." "I think it's a frightfully good idea," said Lady Ramkin. "Well done, that ape." Vimes shrugged. The world was mad enough already. What could make it worse? "Okay," he said. "Okay, I give in. Fine, give him a badge, although I'm damned if I know where he'll wear it. Fine, yes, why not?" "You all right, Captain?" said Colin, all concerned. Fine. Welcome to the new watch," snapped Vimes, striding vaguely around the room. "Great, after all, we pay peanuts, don't we? So we may as well employ The sergeant's hand slapped respectfully across Vimes's mouth. "Just one thing, Captain," said Colin urgently to Vimes's astonished eyes. "You don't use the M word? Gets right up his nose, sir. He can't help it. Loses all self-control. Like a red rag to a wasp name, sir. Ape is all right, sir, but not the M word, because, sir, when he gets angry, he doesn't just go and sulk, sir, if you get my drift. He's no trouble at all apart from that, sir, all right? Just don't say monkey. Oh, shit." The brethren were nervous. He'd heard them talking. Things were moving too fast for them. He thought he'd led them into the conspiracy a bit at a time, never giving them more truth than their little brains could cope with, but he'd still overestimated them. A firm hand was needed. Firm, but fair. "Brothers," said the Supreme Grand Master, "are the cuffs of veracity duly enhanced?" "What?" said Brother Watchtower vaguely. "Oh, the cuffs. Yeah, enhanced, right. And the martlets of beckoning, are they fittingly divested?" Brother Plasterer gave a guilty start. "Me? What? Oh, fine, no problem. Divested. Yes." The Supreme Grand Master paused. "Brothers," he said softly, "we are so near. Just once more. Just a few hours. Once more, and the world is ours. Do you not understand, brothers?" Brother Plasterer shuffled a foot. "Well," he said, "I mean, of course, yes. No fears about that. Behind you 110%. He's going to say only, thought the Supreme Grand Master. Only, that is, all of us, we've been odd, really. You feel so different after don't you, after summoning the dragon, sort of cleaned out? Wait. Who's... That's weird. Oh! This is weird. Sorry, I thought that was Brother Plaster talking, but it looks like it was Brother Watchtower, because Brother Plaster says something afterwards, so let's just take that from the top. That is, all of us, we've been odd, really. You feel so different, don't you, after summoning the dragon? Sort of cleaned out, said Brother Plaster helpfully. Yes, it's like Brother Watchtower struggled with the serpents of self-expression. Taken something out of you. Sucked dry, said Brother Plasterer. Yeah, like he said, and maybe it's a bit risky. Like stuff's being dragged from your actual living brain by eldritch creatures from the beyond, said Brother Plasterer. I'd have said more like a bit of a sick headache myself, said Brother Watchtower helplessly. And we was wondering, about all this stuff about cosmic balance and that because, look what happened to poor old Dunnikin. Could be a bit of a judgment. It was just a maddened crocodile hidden in a flower bed, said the Supreme Grand Master. It could have happened to anyone. I understand your feelings, however. You do? Said Brother Watchtower. Oh, yes, they're only natural. All the greatest wizards feel a little ill at ease before undertaking a great work such as this. The brethren preen themselves. Great wizards, that's us, yeah. But in a few hours it'll be over, and I am sure that the king will reward you handsomely. The future will be glorious. This normally did the trick. It didn't appear to be working this time. But the dragon, Brother Watchtower began. There won't be a dragon. We won't need it. Look, said the Supreme Grand Master. It's quite simple. The lad will have a marvelous sword. Everyone knows kings have marvelous swords. This'll be the marvelous sword you've been telling us about, would it? Said the Brother Plasterer. And when it touches the dragon, said the Supreme Grand Master, it'll be... Phoom! Yeah, they do that, said Brother Doorkeeper. My uncle kicked a swamp dragon once. He found it eating his pumpkins. Damn thing nearly took his leg off. The Supreme Grand Master sighed. A few more hours, yes, And then no more of this. The only thing he hadn't decided was whether to let them alone, who'd believe them after all, or send the guard to arrest them for being terminally stupid. No, he said patiently. I mean the dragon will vanish. We'll have sent it back. End of dragon. Won't people be a bit suspicious, said Brother Plasterer. Won't they expect lumps of dragon all over the place? No, said the Supreme Grandmaster triumphantly, because one touch from the sword of truth and justice will totally destroy the spawn of evil. The brethren stared at him. That's what they'll believe anyway, he added. We can provide a bit of mystic smoke at the time. Dead easy, Mystic Smoke, said Brother Fingers. No bits, then, said Brother Plasterer, a shade disappointed. Brother Watchtower coughed. Dunno if people will accept that, he said. Sounds a bit too neat, like. Listen, snapped the Supreme Grandmaster. They'll accept anything. They'll see it happen. People will be so keen to see the boy win, they won't think twice about it. Depend upon it. Now, let us commence. He concentrated. Yes, it was easier. Easier every time. He could feel the scales, feel the rage of the dragon as he reached into the place where the dragons went and took control. This was power, and it was his. Sergeant Colin winced. Ow, he said. Don't be a big softy, said Lady Ramkin cheerfully, tightening the bandage with a well-practiced skill handed down through many generations of Ramkin womenfolk. He hardly touched you. And he's very sorry, said Carrot sharply. Show the sergeant how sorry you are. Go on. Ooh, said the librarian sheepishly. Don't let him kiss me, squeaked Colin. Do you think picking someone up by their ankles and bouncing their head on the floor comes under the heading of striking a superior officer, said Carrot. I'm not pressing charges, me, said the sergeant hurriedly. Can we get on, said Vimes impatiently. We're going to see if Errol can sniff out the dragon's lair. Lady Ramkin thinks it's got to be worth a try. You mean set a depot with spring-loaded sides, tripwires, well, and knife blades driven by water power, broken glass, and scorpions to catch a thief, Captain, said the sergeant doubtfully. Ow! Yes, we don't want to lose the scent, said Lady Ramkin. Stop being a big baby, Sergeant. Brilliant idea about using Errol, ma'am, if I may make so bold, said Nobby, while the sergeant blushed under his bandage. Vimes was not certain how long he would be able to put up with Nobby, the social mountaineer. Carrot said nothing. He was gradually coming to terms with the fact that he probably wasn't a dwarf, but dwarf blood flowed in his veins in accordance with the famous principle of morphic resonance, and his borrowed genes were telling him that nothing was going to be that simple. Finding a whore even when the dragon wasn't at home was pretty risky. Anyway, he was certain he'd know if there was one around. The presence of large amounts of gold always made a dwarf's palms itch, and his weren't itching. We'll start by that wall in the shade, said the captain. Sergeant Colin glanced sideways at Lady Ramkin and found it impossible to show cowardice in the face of the supportive. He contented himself with, Is that wise, Captain? Of course it isn't. If we were wise, we wouldn't be in the watch. I say, all of this is tremendously exciting, said Lady Ramkin. Oh, I don't think you should come, milady, Vimes began. Sybil, please. It's a very disreputable area, you see. But I'm sure I shall be perfectly safe with your men, she said. I'm sure vagabonds just melt away when they see you. That's dragons, thought Vimes. They melt away when they see dragons and just leave their shadows on the wall. Whenever he felt that he was slowing down or that he was losing interest, he remembered those shadows, and it was like having dull fire poured down his backbone. Things like that shouldn't be allowed to happen. Not in my city. In fact, the shades were not a problem. Many of its denizens were out horde hunting anyway, and those that remained were far less inclined than hitherto to lurk in dark alleys. Besides, the more sensible of them recognized that Lady Ramkin, if waylaid, would probably tell them to pull up their socks and not be silly in a voice so used to command that they would probably find themselves doing it. The wall hadn't been knocked down yet and still bore its gristly fresco. Errol sniffed around it, trotted up the alley once or twice, and went to sleep. Didn't work, said Sergeant Cullen. Good idea, though, said Nobby loyally. It could be all the rain and people walking about, I suppose, said Lady Ramkin. Vimes scooped up the dragon. It had been a vain hope anyway. It was just better to be doing something than nothing. We'd better get back, he said. The sun's gone down. They walked back in silence. The dragon's even tamed the shades, Vimes thought. It's taken over the whole city, even when it isn't here. People will start tying virgins to rocks any day now. It's a metaphor of human bloody existence, a dragon, and if that wasn't bad enough, it's also a bloody great hot flying thing. He pulled out the key to the new headquarters. While he was fumbling in the lock, Errol woke up and started to yammer. Not now, Vimes said. His side twinged. The night had barely started, and already he felt too tired. A slate slid down the roof and smashed on the cobbles beside him. Captain, hissed Sergeant Colin. What? It's on the roof, Captain. Oh, wait, no, sorry. He said it differently. They describe how the line is delivered after the line is delivered. I love reading books. Sorry. It's on the roof, Captain. Something about the sergeant's voice got through to Vimes. It wasn't excited. It wasn't frightened. It just had a tone of dull, leaden terror. He looked up. Errol started to bounce up and down under his arm. The dragon, was peering down interestedly over the guttering. Its face alone was taller than a man. Its eyes were the size of very large eyes, colored a smoldering red and filled with an intelligence that had nothing to do with human beings. It was far older, for one thing. It was an intelligence that had already been long basted in guile and marinated in cunning by the time a group of almost monkeys were wondering whether standing on two legs was a good career move. It wasn't an intelligence that had any truck with or even understood the art of diplomacy. It wouldn't play with you or ask you riddles, but it understood all about arrogance and power and cruelty, and if it could possibly manage it, it would burn your head off, because it liked to. It was even more angry than usual at the moment. It could sense something behind its eyes, a tiny, weak, alien mind bloated with self-satisfaction. It was infuriating like an unscratchable itch. It was making it do things it didn't want to do, and stopping it from doing things it wanted to do very much. Those eyes were, for the moment, focused on Errol, who was going frantic. Vimes realized that all that stood between him and 1,000,000 degrees of heat was the dragon's vague interest in why Vimes had a smaller dragon under his arm. "Don't make any sudden moves," said Lady Ramkin's voice behind him, "and don't show fear. They can always tell when you're afraid." "Is there any other advice you can offer at this time?" said Vimes slowly, trying to speak without moving his lips. "Well, tickling them behind their ears often works." "Oh," said Vimes weakly, "and a good sharp no and taking away their food bowl." "And hitting them on the nose with a roll of paper is what I do in extreme cases." In the slow, brightly outlined, desperate world Vimes was now inhabiting, which seemed to revolve around the craggy nostrils a few meters away from him, he became aware of a gentle hissing sound. The dragon was taking a deep breath. The intake of air stopped. Vimes looked into the darkness of the flame ducts and wondered whether he'd see anything, whether there'd be some tiny white glow or something before fiery oblivion swept over him. At that moment, a horn rang out. The dragon raised its head in a puzzled way and made a noise that sounded vaguely interrogative without being in any way a word. The horn rang out again. The noise seemed to have a number of echoes that lived a life of their own. It sounded like a challenge. If that wasn't what it was, then the hornblower was soon going to be in trouble, because the dragon gave Vimes a smoldering look, unfolded its enormous wings, leapt heavily into the air, and against all the rules of aerodynamics, flew slowly away in the direction of the sound. Nothing in the world should have been able to fly like that. The wings swept up and down with a noise like potted thunder, but the dragon moved as if it was idly sculling through the air. If it stopped flapping, the movement suggested, it would simply glide to a halt. It floated, not flew. For something the size of a barn with an armor-plated hide, it was a pretty good trick. It passed over their heads like a barge, heading for the Plaza of Broken Moons. "Follow it!" shouted Lady Ramkin. "That's not right, it flying like that. I'm pretty sure there's something in one of the witchcraft laws," said Carrot, taking out his notebook. "And it's damaged the roof. It's really piling up the offenses, you know." "You all right, Captain?" said Sergeant Colin. "I could see right up its nose," said Captain Vimes dreamily. His eyes focused on the worried face of the sergeant. "Where's it gone?" he demanded. Colin pointed along the street. Vimes glowered at the shape disappearing over the rooftops. "Follow it," he said. The horn sounded again. Other people were hurrying towards the plaza. The dragon drifted ahead of them like a shark heading towards a wayward airbed, its tail flickering slowly from side to side. "Some loony's going to fight it," said Nobby. "I thought someone would have a go," said Colin. "Poor bugger will be baked in his own armor." This seemed to be the opinion of the crowds lining the plaza. The people of Ankh-Morpork had a straightforward, no-nonsense approach to entertainment, and while they were looking forward to seeing a dragon slain, they'd be happy to settle instead for seeing someone being baked alive in his own armor. You didn't get the chance every day to see someone baked alive in his own armor. It would be it would be something for the children to remember. Excuse me. Back to someone getting baked alive in their own armor. Vimes was jostled and bounced around by the crowd as more people flooded into the palace behind them. The horn sounded a third challenge. "That's a slug horn, that is," said Colin knowledgeably. "Like a tocsin, only deeper." "You sure?" said Nobby. "Yup. Must have been a pretty big slug." "Peanuts, figgins, hot sausages," whined a voice behind him. "Hello, lads. Hello, Captain Vimes. In at the death, eh? Have a sausage on the house." "What's going on, Throat?" said Vimes, clinging to the vendor's tray as more people spilled around them. "Some kid's ridden into the city said he'll kill the dragon," said Cut Me on Throat. "Got a magic sword, he says." "Has he got magic skin?" "You got no romance in your soul, Captain," said Throat, removing a very hot toasting fork from the tiny frying pan on his tray and applying it gently to the buttock of a large woman in front of him. "Stand aside, madam. Commerce is the lifeblood of the city, thank you very much. Of course," he continued, "by rights there should be a maiden chained to a rock, only the ant said no. That's the trouble with some people. No sense of tradition. This lad says he's the rightful heir, too." Vimes shook his head. The world was definitely going mad around him. "You've lost me there," he said. "Heir," said Throat patiently. "You know, Heir to the throne. What throne? The throne of Ankh. What throne of Ankh? You know, kings and that. Throne looked reflective. Wish I knew what his bloody name is, he said. I put an order into Igneous the Troll's all-night wholesale pottery for 3 gross of coronation mugs, and it's going to be a right pain painting all the names in afterward. Should I put you down for a couple, Captain? To you, 90 pence, and that's cutting me own throat. Vimes gave up and shoved his way back through the throng using Carrot as a lighthouse. The Lance Constable loomed over the crowd, and the rest of the rank had anchored themselves to him. It's all gone mad, he shouted. What's going on, Carrot? There's a lad on a horse in the middle of the plaza, said Carrot. He's got a glittery sword, you know. Doesn't seem to be doing much at the moment, though. Vimes fought his way into the lee of Lady Ramkin. Kings, he panted, of Ankh, and thrones, are there? What? Oh, yes, there used to be, said Lady Ramkin. Hundreds of years ago, why? Some kid says he's heir to the throne. That's right, said Throat, who'd followed Vimes in the hope of clinching a sale. He made a big speech about how he was going to kill the dragon, overthrow the usurpers, and right all wrongs. Everyone cheered. Hot sausages, 2 for $1, made of genuine pig. Why not buy one for the lady? Don't you mean pork, sir? Said Carrot warily, eyeing the glistening tubes. Manner of speaking, said Throat quickly. Certainly your actual pig products. Genuine pig. Everyone cheers at any speech in this city, growled Vimes. It doesn't mean anything. Get your pig sausages, 5 for $2, said Throat, who never let a conversation stand in the way of trade. Could be good for business, could monarchy. Pig sausages in a bun, and righting all wrongs too. Sounds like a solid idea to me. With onions! Can I press you to a hot sausage, madam? Said Nobby. Lady Ramkin looked at the tray around Throat's neck. Thousands of years of good breeding came to her aid, and there was only the faintest suggestion of horror in her voice when she said, My, they look good. What splendid foodstuffs. Are they made by monks on some mystic mountain? Said Carrot. Throat gave him an odd look. No, he said patiently. By pigs. What wrongs? Said Vimes urgently. Come on, tell me. What wrongs is he going to right? Well, said Throat, there's, taxes. That's wrong for a start. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Paying taxes was something that, in Throat's world, happened only to other people. That's right, an old woman said next to him. And the gutter of me house links something dreadful, and the landlord won't do nothing. That's wrong. And premature baldness, said the man in front of her. That's wrong, too. Vimes's mouth dropped open. Ah, kings can cure that, you know, said another proto-monarchist knowingly. As a matter of fact, said Throat, rummaging in his pack, I've got 1 bottle left of this astonishing ointment what is made, he glared at Carrot, by some ancient monks who live on a mountain. And they can't answer back, you know, the monarchist went on. That's how you can tell they're royal, completely incapable of it. It's to do with being gracious. Fancy, said the leaky guttering woman. Money, too, said the monarchist, enjoying the attention. They don't carry it. That's how you can always tell a king. Why? It's not that heavy, said the man whose remaining hair was spread across the dome of his head like the remnant of a defeated army. I can carry hundreds of dollars, no problem. You probably get weak arms being a king, said the woman wisely. Probably with the waving. I've always thought, said the monarchist, pulling out a pipe and beginning to fill it with the ponderous air of one who is going to deliver a lecture, that one of the major problems of being a king is the risk of your daughter getting a prick. There was a thoughtful pause. And falling asleep for 100 years, the monarchist went on stolidly. Ah, said the others, unaccountably relieved. And then there's wear and tear on peas, he added. Well, there would be, said the woman uncertainly. Having to sleep on them all the time, said the monarchist. Not to mention hundreds of mattresses. Right. Is that so? I think I could get him for him wholesale, said Throat. He turned to Vimes, who had been listening to all this with leaden depression. See, Captain? And you'd be in the Royal Guard, I expect. Get some plumes in your helmet. Ah, pageantry, said the monarchist, pointing with his pipe. Very important. Lots of spectacles. What, free? Said Throat. Well, I think maybe you have to pay for the frames, said the monarchist. You're all bloody mad, shouted Vimes. You don't know anything about him, and he hasn't even won yet. Bit of a formality, I expect, said the woman. It's a fire-breathing dragon, screamed Vimes, remembering those nostrils, and he's just a guy on a horse, for heaven's sake. Throat prodded him gently in the breastplate. You got no soul, Captain, he said. When a stranger comes into the city under the thrall of the dragon and challenges it with a glittery sword, well, there's only one outcome, ain't there? It's probably destiny. Thrall? Shouted Vimes. Thrall? You thieving bugger, Throat! You were flogging cuddly dragon dolls yesterday! That's just business, Captain. No need to get excited about it, said Throat pleasantly. Vimes went back to the rank in a gloomy rage. Say what you liked about the people of Ankh-Morpork, they had always been staunchly independent, yielding to no man their right to rob, defraud, embezzle, and murder on an equal basis. This seemed absolutely right to Vimes's way of thinking. There was no difference at all between the richest man and the poorest beggar, apart from the fact that the former had lots of food, money, power, fine clothes, and good health. But at least he wasn't any better. Just richer, fatter, more powerful, better dressed, and healthier. It had been like that for hundreds of years. And now they get one sniff of an ermine robe and they go all gooey, he muttered. The dragon was circling the plaza slowly and warily. Vimes craned to see over the heads in front of him. In the same way that various predators have the silhouette of their prey almost programmed into their genes, it was possible that the shape of someone on a horse holding a sword clicked a few tumblers in a dragon's brain. It was showing keen but wary interest. Back in the crowd, Vimes shrugged. I didn't even know we were a kingdom. Well, we haven't been for ages, said Lady Ramkin. The kings got thrown out, and jolly good job, too. They could be quite frightful. But you're from a highborn family, he said. I should have thought you'd be all four kings. Some of them were fearful orcs, you know, she said airily. Wives all over the place and chopping people's heads off, fighting pointless wars, eating with their knife, chucking half-eaten chicken legs over their shoulders, that sort of thing. Not our sort of people at all. The plaza went quiet. The dragon had flapped slowly to the far end, and was almost stationary in the air, apart from the slow beating of the wings. Vimes felt something claw gently at his back, and then Errol was on his shoulder, gripping with his hind claws. His stubby wings were beating in time with those of the bigger specimen. He was hissing. His eyes were fixed on the hovering bulk. The boy's horse jigged nervously on the plaza's flagstones as he dismounted, flourished the sword, and turned to face the distant enemy. He certainly looks confident, Vimes told himself. On the other hand, how does the ability to slay dragons fit you for kingship in this day and age? It was certainly a very shiny sword. You had to admit that. And now it was 2 o'clock the following morning, and all was well apart from the rain. It was drizzling again. There are some towns in the multiverse which think they know how to have a good time. Places like New Orleans and Rio reckon they not only know how to push the boat out, but set fire to the harbor as well. But compared to Ankh-Morpork with its hair down, they're a Welsh village at 2 p.m. on a wet Sunday afternoon. Fireworks banged and sparkled in the damp air over the turbid mud of the River Ankh. Various domesticated animals were being roasted in the streets. Dancers congaed from house to house, often managing to pick up any loose ornaments while doing so. There was a lot of quaffing going on. People who in normal circumstances would never think of doing it were shouting hurrah. Vimes stalked gloomily through the crowded streets, feeling like the only pickled onion in a fruit salad. He'd given the rank the evening off. He wasn't feeling at all royalist. He didn't think he had anything against kings as such, but the sight of Ankh-Morporkians waving flags was mysteriously upsetting. That was something only silly subject people did in other countries. Besides, the idea of royal plumes in his hat revolted him. He'd always had a thing about plumes. Plumes sort of, bought you off, told everyone that you didn't belong to yourself. And he'd feel like a bird. It'd be the last straw. His errant feet led him back to the yard. After all, where else was there? His lodgings were depressing, and his landlady had complained about the holes, which, despite much shouting, Errol kept making in the carpet. And the smell Errol made. And Vimes couldn't drink in a tavern tonight without seeing things that would upset him even more than the things he normally saw when he was drunk. It was nice and quiet, although the distant sounds of revelry could be heard through the window. Errol scrambled down from his shoulder and started to eat the coke in the fireplace. Vimes sat back and put his feet up. What a day. And what a fight! The dodging, the weaving, the shouts of the crowd, the young man standing there looking tiny and unprotected, the dragon taking a deep breath in a way now very familiar to Vimes, and not flaming. That had surprised Vimes. It had surprised the crowd. It had certainly surprised the dragon, which had tried to squint at its own nose and clawed desperately at its flame ducts. It had remained surprised right up until the moment when the lad ducked in under one claw and thrust the sword home. And then a thunderclap. You'd have thought there'd have been some bits of dragon left, really. Vimes pulled a scrap of paper towards him. He looked at the notes he'd made yesterday. Item, heavy dragon, but yet it can fly right well. Item, the fire be main hot, yet issueth from on living things. Item, the swamp dragons be right poor things, yet this monstrous form waxeth full mightily. Item, for whence it cometh none know, nor whither it goeth, nor where it bideth between times. Item, why for did it burn so neatly? He pulled the pen and ink towards him, and in a slow round hand added, Item, can a dragon be destroyed into utterly nothing? He thought for a while and continued, Item, why for did it explode that no one may find it, search they greatly? A puzzler, that. Lady Ramkin said that when a swamp dragon exploded, there was dragon everywhere, and this one had been a damn great thing. Admittedly, its insides must have been an alchemical nightmare, but the citizens of Ankh-Morpork should still have been spending the night shoveling dragon off the streets. No one seemed to have bothered about this. The purple smoke was quite impressive, though. Errol finished off the coke and started on the fire irons. So far this evening he'd eaten 3 cobblestones, a doorknob, something unidentifiable he'd found in the gutter, and, to general astonishment, 3 of cut-me-own-throats sausages made of genuine pork organs. The crunching of the poker going down mingled with the patter of the rain on the windows. Vimes stared at the paper again and then wrote, Item, how can kings come of nothing? He hadn't even seen the lad close to. He looked personable enough, not exactly a great thinker, but definitely the kind of profile you wouldn't mind seeing on your small change. Mind you, after killing the dragon, he could have been a cross-eyed goblin for all that it mattered. The mob had borne him in triumph to the patrician's palace. Lord Vetinari had been locked up in his own dungeons. He hadn't put up much of a fight, apparently, just smiled at everyone and went quietly. What a happy coincidence for the city that just when it needed a champion to kill the dragon, a king came forth. Vimes turned this thought over for a while. Then he turned it back to front. He picked up the quill and wrote, "Item. What a happy chance it be for a lad that would be king, that there be a dragon to slay to prove beyond doubt his bony fids." It was a lot better than birthmarks and swords, that was for sure. He twiddled the quill for a while and then doodled, "Item. The dragon was not a mechanical device, yet surely no wizard has the power to create a beast of that magnet size. Item. Why, in the pinch, could it not flame? Item. Where did it come from? Item. Where did it go?" The rain pounded harder on the window. The sounds of celebration became distinctly damp and then faded completely. There was a murmur of thunder. Vimes underlined "go" several times. After further consideration, he added 2 more question marks. After staring at the effect for some time, he rolled the paper into a ball and threw it into the fireplace, where it was fielded and swallowed by Errol. There had been a crime. Senses Vimes didn't know he possessed. Ancient policeman's senses prickled the hairs on his neck and told him there had been a crime. It was probably such an odd crime that it didn't figure anywhere in Carrot's book, but it had been committed, all right. A handful of high-temperature murders was only the start of it. He'd find it and give it a name. Then he stood up, took his leather raincape from its hook behind the door, and stepped out into the naked city. This is where the dragons went. They lie not dead, not asleep, not waiting, because waiting implies expectation. Possibly the word we're looking for here is angry. It could remember the feel of real air under its wings and the sheer pleasure of the flame. Oh, it's coming on 2 hours. And the sheer pleasure of the flame. There had been empty skies above and an interesting world below, full of strange running creatures. Existence had a different texture there, a better texture. And just when it was beginning to enjoy it, it had been crippled, stopped from flaming, and whipped back like some hairy canine mammal. The world had been taken away from it. In the reptilian synapses of the dragon's mind, the suggestion was kindled that, just possibly, it could get the world back. It had been summoned and disdainfully banished again, but perhaps there was a trail, a scent, a thread that would lead to the sky. Perhaps there was a pathway of thought itself. It recalled a mind, the peevish voice so full of its own diminutive importance, a mind almost like that of a dragon, but on a tiny, tiny scale. Aha! It stretched its wings. And I think that is where we will leave off for now, because we've passed the 2-hour mark. My throat is very tired, and that was a doozy of a cliffhanger. Woo! Well, I hope you all had a good time. The VOD should be up almost immediately. I'll put it in the reading playlist as before. If you missed the first stream, that VOD is also still up. This has been really fun. I hope you guys had a good time. As I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, I'm not sure if I'll be able to continue reading this exactly. I encourage all of you who are curious to know what happens next to pick up a copy at a library or an ebook or order one online. There's plenty of places to read this stuff. I will announce if I can continue streaming this. If not, I might do more reading streams of other stories. As always, thank you so much for signing on. We will probably be streaming more games and readings and stuff in future. We haven't worked out a schedule for that. But yeah, stay tuned. Thank you all so much for popping in, and I will see you later. Yeah, I think that about wraps it up. Goodbye. End stream. Yes, I really mean it.